and welcome to the May 31st Fitchburg City Council as a whole committee meeting. Please be advised that FATV will be recording this meeting for public broadcast. We'll be audio and video recording. I ask that anyone in the audience who is recording, please stand and identify yourself for the record by name and address. Seeing none, Councillor Kuchar, would you lead us in the salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll? And I'll remind those councillors participating remotely to please indicate when you chime in that you are remote.
Councillor Kuchar?
Here.
Councillor Cragen? Councillor Cruz?
Here.
Councillor Di Natale?
Here.
Councillor Fleming?
Here.
Remote.
Remote.
Councillor Green? Councillor Schultz?
Councillor, you're muted.
Here remotely.
Thank you. Councillor Squalia?
Present.
And Councillor Van Hazinga?
Here remotely.
President Zarella?
Here.
And Councillor Bolsheman?
Here physically.
And mentally,
all.
I hope.
Thank you all.
Thank you. The public had been advised to contact the city clerk's office by noon today regarding any comments of no more than 2 minutes. None were brought to our attention. If there is anyone in the audience wishing to speak at public comment, we don't have the podium. Can I ask that someone make a microphone available, please? Please approach, identify yourself by name and address, and identify the agenda item on which you wish to speak, and you may speak for not more than 2 minutes.
Jacqueline Wetchy, Fitchburg resident, speaking on agenda item number 1. You should defund the Board of Health, send the budget back to the mayor for a rewrite. The one essential thing the health department does is rubbish removal, which is a separate line item in the budget. Yes, the board does a few nice things, but none are essential. The main driver of improved life expectancy in the city over the course of its history is the work done by our wonderful water and wastewater departments. On May 19th, the Greenfield City Council defunded the police by $425,000, so councils have the power to defund. Such a step is warranted because our Board of Health disregards the will of the people. For example, even after hearing close to 2 hours of wrenching testimony from parents on the harm masks inflict on their children, including disabled and special needs students, 2 of the 3 members voted to continue the mask mandate. They claimed we would get a COVID spike after winter break. Fortunately, they were outvoted and no COVID spike occurred. The 3rd member previously said we needed mandates when other places didn't have them because we're densely populated. But Mass DPH data, since mandates were lifted, consistently show the highest positivity rates in the county are in towns, not cities. They were wrong, and the ordinary people in the city were right. Why are we spending close to $1 million on this board? Any 3 random voters in the city could sit on this board and they would do a better job.
Any further public comment? Seeing none, we will begin our formal agenda. I will defer to the finance team as to how we address these budget items, but we will ultimately when we vote on them at a subsequent meeting, we will vote on them as listed. You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good evening, City Councilors. I'm pleased to present to you a budget that reflects a return to regular business for city government. While there is some recognition of the pandemic and its effects, the majority of the budget is looking forward. The current effects of the pandemic show most clearly in the Board of Health budget, which includes the addition for grant-funded positions aims at keeping the pandemic under control. Their budget includes 9 contact tracers, 1 supervisor, 1 epidemiologist, and a clerical position to support their work. This crew is covered by grant funds the city administers on behalf of the Montechusett Public Health Network, or MPHN. Otherwise, the budget has settled to its pre-pandemic form. Revenues lost due to the pandemic have mostly returned, and the city is poised to rebuild its workforce to pre-pandemic levels. This budget seeks to maintain services while also absorbing the increased costs of health insurance, pension assessments, and collective bargaining agreements. As you know, we have recently settled 5 contracts and therefore have had to absorb 3 years of collective bargaining increases into this budget. As in the past, we will be using current available funds to cover part of next year's snow and ice costs. This budget also continues to the commitment made several years ago to add capacity for future debt service in order to cover the costs of borrowing for the new Crocker School and the library renovation. As you are aware from recent deliberations over a loan order for the Oak Hill water tank replacement project, construction costs are rising, and this increase is affecting current and future projects. We are closely watching the situation as it pertains to the Crocker School project. We expect to bring the library project to City Council in the early fall for your review and approval. We are also in the process of executing the ARPA budget approved by City Council earlier this year. These funds will allow us to undertake projects that otherwise would have been delayed due to a lack of funding. About half the money has been budgeted. After the first of the year, I will be reconvening my advisory committee to review progress on approved projects and make recommendations for allocating the balance of funds. As always, the city and its departments continue to pursue grant opportunities in order to fund activities that enhance this community and capital and infrastructure projects that maintain and improve community assets. I'd like to thank my finance team for their assistance in putting together this budget. And I look forward to working closely with you to finalize a budget that is fiscally responsible and provides critical services to the residents of this city. To reiterate what I have said earlier through email and through my chief of staff, when this budget was presented, you are welcome to reach out to individual department heads to discuss their budget. I only ask that you call first to establish a set appointment. Thank you. And at this time, I will turn the presentation over to City Auditor Calvin Brooks, who will discuss the revenue estimates in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Auditor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a little bit of oversight on how we will proceed. We'll basically be going through this budget page by page, explaining some things that are in each of the department's budgets. At the end of each page, we will pause and allow for any questions that you folks may have as we go through. We're trying to let you know that we're trying to give you the information you need so that as you proceed with your deliberations, we're all working from the same set of information. As you may also know, while I'm going to talk about revenue, the role of the City Council is to review the budget, and you are able to make reductions or cuts in the budget. City Council does not have the authority to add. Items can only be added to with the recommendation of the mayor. Revenue is an estimate done by the city that is kind of a starting point for the budget. So we can talk about it, but the responsibility that the council has is with the expenses and the ability to cut. I would start by saying that this is a conservative budget. That's the way we try and approach it. Revenue estimates are a little under, and expenses are a little high. It gives room for any hiccups as you progress. And I'm going to say it's like a home budget. When you're figuring out what you want to spend for the coming year, you would look at your earnings, your salary from whatever job you have. You don't necessarily consider any overtime you might work because overtime isn't is dependent on what the work is and so on. So that becomes extra money you might have at the end of the year. Likewise, you may find in your spending that you get some discounts here and there, and very often you don't calculate that on your budget. You get the discounts, and then at the end of the year, you have a little extra money. You might even win a lottery ticket and have a little more extra money at the end of the year. But you don't budget around that. You budget on what you know and what is certain, or reasonably certain. So on page 4, which is where I'm starting, the first section is taxation. This assumes a full 2.5% increase in the levy. We estimate new growth here at 650,000, and while it may end up being higher, we won't know that until fall. So that's our starting point. And the 650 is a conservative number because if you look at prior year estimates, we are under that. On state aid, we historically use the governor's budget for state aid. Anyone who's following it knows that the governor's budget and the House budget numbers agree. The Senate has thrown a little bit more money into the unrestricted general government aid, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be there, so that'll be make for some revenue adjustments as we go forward. The assessments are the same. It's based on the governor's numbers. Turning to page 5, we're looking at here at local receipts. So this is money that comes in locally. First thing you might notice is that the other excise rooms, or the room tax, has been returned to its pre-pandemic levels. The city gets revenue from one source, and that's Great Wolf. Great Wolf is up and running, and so we are now able to project that and put that into our revenue estimates. Past 2 years, we've covered that from money coming out of free cash, which was, although you don't generally use money from free cash to balance a budget, in this case it's appropriate because we knew it was a temporary matter. The marijuana sales tax reflects an estimate of $550,000, which is roughly what our receipts will be for this fiscal year. The Department of Revenue generally allows us to use current year revenue estimates for next year's projection. If we vary from that higher, if we try and go higher, they want some justification for it. So what I tend to do is just make sure I'm not over that, so I'm not trying to justify something that is a little iffy. And right here, I'm going to detour just a little bit to talk about other sources of revenue that we could have or that we may be looking at in the future. And over the course of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about 5 different places where we could or will likely be looking at additional revenue coming into the city. The first one I want to talk about is right here, is the local option meals tax. And I include it here because it's mixing with the room tax and the marijuana sales tax. The local option meals tax is 0.75% of a meal, the cost of a meal. So it's basically less than a penny per dollar. I know in the past, sometimes there's been concern that, most communities around here don't have it, so it's going to send a signal and send people to other communities. I'm just going to say that I'm not sure that people would go to another community, to a Cumbies, to spend $1 on their coffee and have to pay an extra penny. On a $40 meal, that local tax would be 30 cents. So I'm not sure it's enough to dissuade people from eating here in Fitchburg. The estimated revenue we could get from that local option meals tax would be about $500,000. So there is some merit in doing that. And although it's general fund revenue, so it would just flow into the big pot of money, it could be done in conjunction with something else where there's a commitment by the council and the mayor to fund something specific with that money. So it's not something that can be guaranteed, but it would be a a handshake kind of a commitment to it. Moving along, partway down, you see charges for services, trash. What we estimate there is the cost of our trash service. If you flip toward the end to page 52, page 52 shows revenue, and it's comparing our budgets to what we have actually received in fiscals 18 through 21. The one on page 5 is what we show for the tax recap. If you look at charges for services, you can see that the trash, back in 2018, we had 3.4 million in receipts, 3.5 in FY19, 3 million in 20. It dropped to 2,000,008 in 21, and then the budget for FY22 is 2,000,005. I point that out because that could become a problem down the road for two reasons. One is if that's based on tipping fees. When the economy falls off, the amount of trash being disposed of falls off, so our fees and our collections go down a little bit. If that falls under what our costs are, then we're going to have to be subsidizing our costs out of the tax levy. Bigger picture is if we make a decision to reduce the amount of waste being dumped in the landfill because we're trying to extend its life, or worst case, we have to close the landfill, we then will lose that as a source of revenue and the city will have to be figuring out another source. So this is my second new revenue source, or as I talked about, one was the meals tax. This would be a second. We would somehow have to begin to look at fees for solid waste. And this would include residential pickup. I know that's been discussed maybe 20 years ago in the city. The issue is going to, if that comes to pass, and I'm not saying it will, it really is dependent on what happens with the landfill. If that comes to pass, we're going to be looking at having to cover $2.5 million of expense with no revenue. And something will have to give because the budget has to balance. Going down a little further, fines and forfeits. Last year we had budgeted $100,000. I bumped that back up to $140,000. We're starting to write tickets again. We had kind of laid off a little bit with the pandemic and starting to be a little more back to where we were, a little more aggressive, and same with the collection of that. Investment income is reduced quite a bit, and that's because interest rates are very low, and so we're getting very little return for the money that we have. I would point out the reimbursement from the airport has historically been $50,000. That reimbursement was removed from revenue in order to help balance the airport budget, and that will be discussed or shown a little bit more when we get to the airport budget.
You kidding me?
You will notice the increase in the water and wastewater reimbursements for indirect costs. This is the first change or first increase we've had in 3 years for that. Available funds, $675,000, is for snow and ice, and represents the money that we're putting into the snow and ice reserve. We've been doing that for the last 3 years, and it's basically using this year's free cash to cover next year's snow and ice deficit. Historically, up until a couple years ago, we were using next year's free cash to cover next year's deficit. We've ramped that up a year ahead, so we're in a better place financially. Lastly, I just want to make a mention about free cash. As I've been talking with a few counselors, they've been pointing out that this year we had $8 million in free cash, which is pretty good. And so are some of these revenue estimates, or is this budget being a little bit too tight? If I look at free cash analysis for July 1 of 2021, which is this year, free cash was about $8.6 million. Of that, $4 million was money budgeted for spending that we didn't spend. In looking back the prior 2 years, usually that figure is $2 million that is returned to the city as unspent funds. It was 4 million for this year, and that was because we had about 2 million in school transportation that was not spent last year, basically because they had a hybrid model and they weren't sending kids to school, so there were no busing costs. In addition, we collected a $1.6 million in tax levy that we hadn't budgeted. That means we're doing a lot better in our collections and picking up the old past due taxes. We also had $850,000 of host fee, marijuana host fee money that we don't budget because that's a short-term revenue, so that fed the $8 million in free cash. So I think I think in the overall, there's not a lot of wiggle room within the revenue. I think we were just, a lot of things came together this year for free cash. The free cash the year before was at $3,368,000, and that was partly the effect of the pandemic and some of the lost revenue. So that's where we just have to be careful with what we're doing. So I guess at that point, I'm going to ask if there are any questions on revenue.
So I'm going to open this up to the council for questions. I do want to emphasize that tonight, the only questions that we should be asking are for clarification of the budget line items. We are not debating city policies tonight or anything of that nature. If that needs to be discussed, it can be discussed at the meeting at which we will actually vote on the budget. So that said, are there any questions from councilors? Councilor Squalia.
Yes, Calvin, could you just remind me why we have on page 5 the general fund revenue with the recaps, and then on page 52 it has the actual number of receipts?
Okay, so the one on page 5, the recap, is what we put on what's called the tax recap. Recap is for recapitulation, and that's where that's how we set the tax rate. We're basically taking all of our revenue, matching it with what we've spent in the past year. Free cash gets thrown in, all the transfers, everything, and we are able to set the tax rate. It's basically proving our accounting. So these are what we're using for budget numbers in the tax recap. On page 52? On page 52 is what actually came in for revenue. So they're close, but they're not exact. On page 52 is what actually came in. So if we could, on the recap, estimate that we're getting 200,000. Actual could be 300,000, or it could be 150. It depends. So it kind of gives you a chance to say, okay, here's what we were estimated, how far off were we?
So what you were saying about the cannabis impact fees, for example, that's in the budget on page 52, but we're not adding that in the budget on page number 5 because we're not including that in the budget because it's not a continuously funded.
Correct.
Revenue
The
source.
impact fee or the host fee, most of those agreements are 5-year agreements so that they end at a certain time. And they were hard to project, and so we weren't using them in our tax recap. And it's basically a little bonus. It's again, another cushion. I guess I would say it's like if you buy a lot of lottery tickets, you figure you're going to come out ahead. So you just have that as, at the end of the year, you can take a vacation. Or fix the roof that leaks. I guess that's a better example.
Okay. So when it comes to the charges for services for trash.
Yep.
The charges for service, by that's revenue that we get from the landfill.
Correct.
Yes, and so that 2.6 million that we're budgeting what you were saying is in a few years, maybe, what, is it 3 or 4 years, 2026? If the landfill closes, we'll no longer have 2.6 million. In addition, we will have to pay whatever the fee is on the Board of Health page for
Right.
rubbish
Right.
removal
If the
services.
landfill closes, that number would go to 0.
Right.
And you're now looking at a $2.6 million deficit in the budget. Correct?
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Councilor Brochman?
On that budget and on the landfill, are
Yes, sir.
we already getting prepared for that to happen, or are we just going to, saying every year we're going to pay 2.6 million, 2.5, 2.6?
So as long as the revenue comes in to cover our costs, that's how the budget is going to be. Every year I check with Steve Curry, the health director, who also oversees trash pickup, and say, all right, what's the prognosis? We're 2 or 3 years. He's led me to believe that they can do an expansion at the current landfill and pick up maybe another 4 or 5 years, which is good for me. But it gives us some time to make some, to plan ahead.
We've been in discussions with Waste Management, along with Department of Environmental Affairs regarding the landfill. I believe the state feels similar to how we feel, that it's an important asset, one of the few that are left in this state, I might add. Most of them have been closed. So that's where the additional cost comes in as well. You're going to have to pay to throw, and we're going to have to truck everything out, which is what a lot of states do now to receiving states. I don't want to see it happen, get to that point. But we continue to work with Waste Management, and as I said, the legislature as well. It's a work in progress. So please, I don't want to alarm anyone. This is not imminent by any means, but it's a concern that we have, and we're addressing it head on. Thank you.
Right, and just to reiterate what the mayor said, I'm not saying that this is, I'm not trying to raise an alarm, I'm just saying it's there. We all need to keep our eye on it, because at some point, that something could happen, and we need to just be ready to deal with it.
Now, I know on page 52, favorite subject, our wonderful airport.
Yes, sir.
I noticed that fiscal year '23, nothing's budgeted.
Correct. Correct.
We will
So-
get to that when we address the airport budget.
I hope we get all night.
Any further questions from councilors on the revenue portion of the budget?
I have one more.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Why did our fire ambulance service fees go up? Did we do a new contract where we're getting more from the ambulance service?
Yes, I believe in the last contract, it went up $10,000 the last year.
How long is that contract?
Not sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Okay. So
may proceed.
Going to page 6, this is just a summary of expenses and then offset by the revenue. If you look at the column that's entitled FY23 Mayor, you can see at the bottom, there's a balance of $890. That's the surplus in this budget. You can see that previous years generally show a deficit. That's because the actual expenses are also covered by free cash appropriations or other appropriations. So it's just the way the accounting works. FY21 shows a surplus. Part of that is because that year, $2 million got returned by the schools for school transportation. There were some other spending that wasn't done because of the pandemic. And just a short note on the two right-hand columns, one of them is comparing the FY23 mayor's budget to what was projected for FY22. I will say the FY22 projection was something I did back in January, February, so those numbers could have changed somewhat since then. I didn't go back and make those corrections. And then the right-hand column is mayor versus requested, and this is basically saying that the departments requested something that the mayor reduced. So there are some things we left showing a reduction, some things we did not. If there was contract changes or ordinance changes for salaries, we would make the change on both sides, because the assumption is that the department would want to make those changes.
And would it be accurate to say that in most cases where there's a substantial difference between what was requested and what was funded, that the department heads were aware of this and submitted their requests basically as informational rather than as aspirational.
I think you're correct. What I encourage department heads to do is put down what you need, and so we show those. A lot of it's capital. I mean, the big number is in the Department of Public Works. They put in for paving, they put in for a lot of things that just, right off the bat, we know we're not going to fund through the budget. They're going to be funded out of free cash or reserve for capital and those kinds of things. I think it's important for city council to see it. If they're asking for additional positions, we want to show that so that the council can see that there were positions requested that the mayor chose not to fund.
Excellent, thank you. I believe Councilor Di Natale has a question?
Thank you. This FY23 requested column, can you please answer for me, Mr. Brooks? If a department has nothing budgeted for a specific line item in FY22, and they ask for $500,000 for that same line item in 2023, and then the mayor funds it at zero again, so it was zero in '22, they want $500,000 in '23, they don't get it, they get zero again. Is that, in the world of municipal finance, a cut to their budget? Is the cut based on what they want or what they got last year?
I think it's a matter of how people want to define what a cut is.
Oh, really?
I think it's a reduction in,
So if I was making $10 in salary, and I asked my boss for 15, and she gives me 12, I'm gonna go home and tell my wife she cut my salary $3, she didn't increase it too?
Counselor, I'm not going to tell you what to tell your wife.
It's not semantics, that's what municipal finance is. What they get and what they end up getting next year, the difference is whether they got an increase or not what they asked for. Because if we give them what they asked for, we'll be bankrupt tomorrow.
Right. So I think, so yes, if you look at the column FY23 versus FY22, that's comparing what they got last year to what the mayor's giving them this year.
Correct.
So if it's an increase, you gave them an increase. If it's a decrease, there's a decrease. And then, and I guess I would say if you look at the DPW, which has a $2.6 million decrease, the difference there is that in FY22, there's also free cash appropriations going in there that haven't yet been considered in FY23 because we haven't gotten to that point in their budget.
I understand it. Most of the stuff that doesn't get funded gets covered through free cash. That's intentional.
Correct.
That's how it should be.
Correct.
But I wanted to ask that question. You know, I know what the answer is. I'm just going to say it. That's what it means. But, you know, this column, I'm not a fan of sometimes. That's all.
Okay.
Because of that statement, that we need to be aware of the fact that what a department wants doesn't mean they got cut. But it always gets told that way. So I want the public to be aware of that if you're funded at X and you get funded at Y, which is the same, but you ask for more than Y, you're not getting cut. You're getting the same you got last year. I just want to make that very clear. Some may call it semantics, it's
Okay,
not.
Counselor.
So,
Counselor, I'm
Some
just
may
going to
call it
remind you,
semantics, but it's not.
Counselor,
Thank you.
please do not speak over me. I'm just reminding counselors that this is questions only and only in the nature of clarification. The initial question was in order, but please restrict it to the question being asked and answered.
I will rephrase it one more time. If a department gets a $100 budget this year,
Counselor, it's been asked and it's been answered
I'm going to ask
by
you,
both you and by Auditor Brooks.
but it's my time, Mr. President.
Counselor, it's not your time to ask the same question 5 different ways.
I'm not asking it 5 different ways. I'm repeating it for effect.
Yes, it's been asked, it's been answered. I understand the purpose in
I'll ask it
asking
on the
it.
next page then, because it's a new page. Just ask it on the next page.
No, you won't, Counselor.
Oh, I'm not allowed to
Thank
speak
you.
during my time?
Counselor Boschman?
Councilor Brooke, while we're talking, Councilor Di Natale made a good point here. On the DPW, are they being level funded or are they in the red again this year?
Okay, so if I may defer an answer to that until we get to that section of the budget. Is that all right?
It's going to have to be.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Squalia?
Thank you. Calvin, would you say that by providing the FY23 and FY22 and the mayor versus requested budget, that you're providing more transparency to the public for what the department heads request versus the actual budget that is provided?
I think it can be a way to point out where there are differences and make it easier for people to find it. I
Thank
find
you.
if I'm looking for things, that it's an easy way to find it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Further questions on page 6? Counselor Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a couple questions, but I think if it's specific line item, it'll wait to that page. Is that my understanding?
That would be preferred, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So at this point, I'm going
Mr.
to,
President, can I go right back to page 6 for a minute?
Go ahead.
On page 6, I noticed, I'm looking at the school, Fitchburg Public Schools, fiscal year 60, 21, 62, 22, 66, say 67. They went up to 73, 74 million.
yep.
Is that going to affect our next spending? Are we going to meet, is that our next spending, 74 million?
It is, and I'll get to that later.
That too?
All right, yes, I will.
Yes, page 6 is a summary of all the pages that we're about to cover, so we will get there.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You're very welcome. Auditor Brooks?
Okay, so that concludes the part on revenue. At this point, we go to page 7, and I'll turn it over to the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Natalia Oliver.
Good evening, City Councilor, City Clerk. Today I have the opportunity walking through some of the department's budgets. We will start in first with the legislative budget summary on page 7. So we have the City Council expenses, requested increase to education and travel due to a new $750 annual subscription to the State House News Service, and anticipated increase in participation to conferences. The city clerk personnel for FY22 projected amounts are reflected of the vacancy of the city clerk position from October 2021 to April 2022, and the retirement of the principal clerk in February 2022. The assistant clerk was appointed as provisional clerk during this time. This is why the projected FY22 for assistant clerk is close to half of the annual salary for this position. Projected clerical salary includes temporary help in increasing the greeter receptionist hour to accommodate the office. As you can see here in the greeter receptionist line, it was requested, but it's not funded, $18,000. Do you have any questions? Sure.
Counselor Brochman?
On the greeters receptionist, is the mayor and his wisdom going to go to the senior center and ask for volunteers for people to greet people at the doors?
I wish we can do that, but unfortunately, we're not.
Volunteers now. This is not a paid position. They're volunteering their services like they do up at the hospital. They
Counselor,
volunteer.
as I said, we're not going to be discussing city policy here, except as it directly impacts the line item.
Well, I'm only asking
So-
the question. I'm not discussing it. I'm only asking the
No, I understand. I'd like it if we could restrict questioning to solely the line items under discussion, as there will be other opportunities on other occasions to discuss city operations generally.
Okay, sir, I'll do that just for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Counselor Schultz?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the greeter receptionist. It would seem to me that she would be performing other duties while there's no one coming in. And I was just wondering if that was the case now, or if that could be the case in the future.
Counselor, that's in fact the case. The greeter doesn't just greet people. She's also what we've discovered is she's been very helpful, that position's been helpful with directing phone calls to proper departments. It's cut out some of the confusion sometimes with the phone banking system when people call in. So that's just one aspect of it. The individual that's there now is very conscientious. She finds work for herself to do, and again, I don't want, I suppose this budget we may have to rely, I hope we can go with a supplemental if we can't do something before the budget passes to try and retain that position. But right now,
Yeah, I agree with that.
revenue
Mayor.
is tight, so.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mayor Di Natale. I think it's really a great addition to City Hall to have somebody there to greet people and to, direct them and so on. So I would definitely be in favor of retaining that position.
We're in agreement.
I agree 100% with you, Councilor.
Thank you.
She is very valued, and actually she's off now, and we feel her absence at the City Hall.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, oh, Counselor Squalia?
Just one, the total election, is that for the state election, and that largely will be, the extra cost will largely be reimbursed?
We hope so, but it's, not a guarantee. It's for early voting is our biggest. They've already gave us the dates for November, and they're now saying we're going to have to do it for September as well. So it'll be 10 days before both elections.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question, actually, and it's one that I probably should know already. But when we have obviously the city councilor's line is fixed by ordinance, and we'll be discussing that in a few weeks. But for the other FY23 requested lines under the city council itself, who is making those requests?
Yeah, 1,250?
I
The
believe-
14,000 for advertising, 1,000 for office supplies.
I believe that's coming from the city council through the city clerk's office.
Excellent, okay, just making sure. I assumed so, I just wanted to double check and make sure that it wasn't something that I had dropped the ball on and that you guys had to, guesstimate.
We have a whole spreadsheet.
Excellent, excellent. Just making sure. All right, seeing no further questions, we can move on if you're ready.
Yeah. So now we are on page number A, the election expenses, voting equipment and maintenance. Requested amount reflects additional poll pads for each ward and precinct. This will automate the check-in and check-out process and eliminate the need for paper voting. I don't know if City Clerk, you would like to add anything to that, but we good, right?
Yeah, no, it speeds up the whole process, and it better tracks because you're actually using their ID. So it helps, especially with the English language, where we're utilizing IDs to be able to get the correct names. It's just another safeguard to make sure that it's all matching up. And it speeds up the process very quickly.
Councilor Squalia?
Are you saying we're requiring IDs to
No.
vote?
When we use the poll pads, that's how they can themselves go in and scan their ID.
The poll workers scan their ID?
Either the resident or the poll worker. I've not worked an election here, but it's that they can go in and put their ID and it scans it.
The voter?
Yes.
But you're not required to do
No.
that?
No, we are not.
You have the option?
Correct.
Rather than the people that sit at the front desk and you tell them, and they find your name?
Correct.
Okay.
Further questions on elections? Councilor Di Natale?
Is there still paper ballots? Did I hear?
Yes.
There is.
Yes.
This is just the digitized check-ins.
Correct.
Okay.
The
thank you.
check-in counter,
Thank
when
you.
they cross your name off with their red pen.
Yes. Yep. Okay.
Further questions on elections? Seeing none, let's proceed.
Page number 9, executive, the mayor's office. So you will see here, the mayor's salary remained the same as last budget. You will see a 2.5 increase on salaries for the chief of staff position and the executive administrative assistant position. Office supplies increased by $300. Any questions?
I would just like to note for the council and for the public that because we will be discussing the mayor and council salaries in the upcoming weeks, if we choose to increase those numbers at all, I would assume we can pay it out of available funds for the current year and then budget it for the following.
So any increase in salaries of elected officials cannot take place until an intervening election has happened.
Right, good call.
In the
Good call.
FY '23,
I knew that.
if you were to change it, it wouldn't affect that budget, it would affect the following budget.
Don't know how that slipped my mind, but thank you. Councilor Squalia.
Just to clarify that, Calvin, would that be the next election, the next municipal election?
Yeah, any elected official has to be re-elected to get the increase. Yes. So it'd be a municipal election.
Is that a state law?
Yes.
And I apologize for forgetting that.
Don't
I
apologize.
should know that right off the top of my head, but
Should have, Council President, should have.
Good
It's
to
the
know for the
aud-
public.
it's the auditor doing his job too, Mr. President.
well, we work together.
You got it.
Further questions on the executive department budget? Councilor Cruz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Regarding for the chief of staff and the executive administrative assistant, are those two positions on the matrix?
They're included in the ordinance.
Thank
So
you.
the matrix is tied to the ordinance. Primarily, that group is department heads, but there are several other non-union positions. These are two of them. The administrative assistant at the fire department is another, the human resources generalist, and if there's a third position in human resources would be as well, because those positions are all non-union positions.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, let's proceed.
Page 10, Human Resources Department. Well, here the increases in the budget are as follows. We have an addition of a third position, an HR assistant, $46,000. We actually took $9,000 from FY22 overtime budget. This position will provide clerical support, currently handled by the HR director by now. The increase in HR director position is retro from FY22, and we have a scheduled step increase on July 1st. All other accounts to stay level funded.
Questions on the HR budget? Councilor Squalia.
The human resources assistant is a part-time position?
Which one?
The new position, the human resources assistant, that's a full-time position?
It's a full-time position.
And the administrative assistant, human resources generalist, is also full-time?
Correct.
Thank you, that's all.
Councilor Brochman?
Is that a misprint? They want to add another person, HR?
It is
We
not.
voted on that earlier.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
I don't think so.
We'll be talking about that one later on in the budget hearings.
Okay. Councilor Di Natale?
Clarify, we didn't have this position this year, right?
No,
No.
this is a new position.
So I don't think
No.
we didn't vote on anything with this position.
Yeah.
This is a brand-new position.
Right, I believe we voted to add the position, like to create the position, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
This is a third position. This is
You
a
mean
new
to fund it,
position for
Mr.
this
President?
budget.
To fund it,
No, to create,
to create it like in an ordinance?
I think. Am I mistaken
I
there?
don't recall that, but be that as it
Okay.
may, I just wanted to make it clear that we have not ratified funding a new position in this department.
Right.
So this would be a new position. My question on that is, how many employees are in the city of Fitchburg outside the schools? Do we know?
Like around 350?
500 employees, not including the schools? And then if you add the schools, so over 1,000? And the Human Resources Director is now responsible, I remember last year, this was a big discussion, for workman's comp now, for the school department,
Yes.
right? That's an added function? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, I just want to point out that some of the work that the Human Resources wants to do, she wants to take it on herself. That I want to point out. So
Counselor?
I don't want to get involved in the debate right now.
We
but
can
we will
discuss
have a
that
debate.
when we are debating.
We will have a debate on this subject.
That's perfectly fine. When it comes to that point, we can debate any cuts that anyone wishes to propose. Further questions regarding the current budget? Seeing none, let's proceed.
Page 11, our legal department. You will see here a 2.5 increase on salaries for our city solicitor and the assistant city solicitor. And we have the litigation special counsel. You will see a difference of 149.83, right? For, I believe this one, it was a meeting a month ago, the executive
Yes,
session.
which,
So you
yes,
have
the
more
meeting which we will
information.
not discuss because it was executive session.
If you want to add anything,
Yes, I'll just note that I know, we all know on the council why this number was so much higher in the previous fiscal year. And this decrease represents essentially a return to normal.
hopefully.
Councilor Brochman?
What about the labor? Next line down, 2 lines down, labor negotiations. Is Vinnie involved with that?
That's for the contracts. They went up for police, fire, and famous. The contracts were up.
And Counselor, we do have outside legal counsel that assists with
We do.
labor negotiations and other labor matters.
Yes, that's a specialist.
Yeah.
Is that right? The special?
Yes.
So actually, this total legal budget could be higher. Am I actually right or wrong?
It could be. I think we
Both ways.
historically try and budget a good starting point, recognizing that depending on what legal difficulties the city may run into, we may have to add to it. And I know this year, because of a couple of things, we've added quite a bit. If we get into a situation next year, I would expect the labor negotiator could go a little higher because we'll be negotiating contracts with police, fire, and the famous unions.
And speak of the devil's advocate.
Where is he?
Welcome to Solicitor Presbytery. And yes, I will note that any prospective legal budget is always subject to dramatic increase if something happens that you couldn't have anticipated. There's no way around it.
So my question to the chair over here, to the city auditor, is that could this budget be over $350,000? Right on the bottom, 350, fiscal year 23, and you get a $500,000.
It's at 343.
Yeah.
And the year, yeah, I mean, I expect it will go up a little bit.
40,000 last year.
Based on, I'm just not sure what's going to go up.
Nobody
I would
knows.
express it that way. If
All
we
right.
end up with a property loss, we're going to have deductibles. If we end up with labor issues, we're going to have labor costs. This year, we had a particular issue on a particular matter that cost us.
Yeah, I know that, I know what you're talking about. All right, I yield the floor.
All right, thank you. Counselor Squalia, then Counselor Di Natale.
Natalia, you mentioned for the labor negotiator that it would be for police, fire, and famous. Is the Teamsters negotiation for the DPW, is that happening in FY '22, or is that included also in the labor negotiator?
Yep. it is included.
And we recently allocated an additional, I don't remember, 25,000-ish for police negotiation. Is that included in this number?
No, it is not. That would be in the FY '22 projected, so no, it is not.
So that the negotiations are kind of spanning FY '22 and FY '23?
It could. If there's money left over, we'll hold that. I do at some point need to sit down with the solicitor and go through his budget, because we just need to make sure that there are sufficient funds to get through the end of the year.
Okay.
And that's primarily that big case that just blew a lot of it out of the water.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Gianatolli?
Would you consider this budget mostly non-recurring in terms of being able to plan for what may happen throughout the year? Right now, you don't know, correct?
This budget being the legal budget?
Right.
Okay. So I would say what's here is recurring.
Right.
And then anything extra is non-recurring in the sense that it
But if you
may
need
not
more
happen.
labor counsel, if there's more issues with contract negotiations or special litigation, that just, we don't know that today. So that is why you don't put that in there, correct?
Correct.
Because in those cases, it would be non-recurring outside of your baseline, because you just don't know.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on the legal department's budget? Seeing none, we can proceed.
Okay, so I will pass this to our treasurer's director and Cervantes.
Thank you. On page 12, we begin with the assessor's budget. Under personal services, most of those increases are either by contract or by ordinance. The assessor's line item increase is also due to the fact that we have a new employee in that position, and they only worked a partial year this year, but there will be a full year's salary for the upcoming year. Under the data collector part-time, there's a $3,000 reduction. That was at the request of the employee for his personal financial situation. And instead, the assessors have agreed to allow him use of their department car, and they've taken that $3,000 and added it down below in the expenses under vehicle expense fuel to cover his travels. Also under expenses, there's a request for, an increased request for contract services. This is to hire a firm that specializes in personal property valuation. The thought is that getting a professional or a company that specializes in this to value the personal property will increase revenues. It will also free up staff time in the assessor's office to concentrate on real estate and other items.
And just to clarify for the general public, many people know this, some people don't. Personal property specifically refers to things that are not real estate. So this new contract position would not apply to the person who assesses your house's value or anything. It's the other stuff. Okay. I have a question from Councilor Gianatolli.
So is this being driven by Amazon? No. It's not, okay. Because I understand that they are going to have a mass amount of personal property with all the trucks and everything, is that correct?
Vehicles fall under Mass State Excise, so anything registered within the city will be getting the excise tax. That's not something that, the excise tax comes through my office and is billed through the Treasurer Collector, but that's handled through the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Yep.
That's really a tax that we haven't even, I don't really consider that. This is basically, when I came on board with the city almost 8 years ago, the standing policy was to, with the split tax rate, was to not be as adamant about collecting personal property. The Department of Revenue wants us to have a full measure and list of our personal property by our reval in fiscal year '25. There's 150 communities in Mass, New Hampshire, and Maine that use the company that we're looking to do this with. And one of the big things with personal property is, last year, we requested $4,000 for an appraisal of our largest taxpayer. And 95% of what they pay taxes on is personal property. But now the state requires cities and towns to do a specific appraisal of the property to come up with the valuation method. We're not experts in that. So the next step from there is, what are we missing? What ended up happening last year was the largest taxpayer in the city's valuation, based on the way the state changed the formula, went up $60 million in value. They paid $1 million more in taxes last year than they did the year previous.
Is this Unitil?
Yes.
And so in terms of that for personal property, like the poles and the wires, is that what's personal property?
Correct. Poles,
Okay.
wires, anything used in the conduct of business, construction work in progress. It's basically the differences between what they consider its value and what the state tells us we should consider. Prior to last year, it was net book value. Unitil would give us a value and we would write it down. And then the state said, 2 electric companies in the last 10 years have sold, and the state said, well, you know, net book value is saying it's worth $100 million, and they're selling for $400 million. So there's got to be a difference. So now they've changed the formula. It costs cities and towns, but as you can see, it costs us, but in the end, we end up reaping the benefits.
But the way I see it, this is $29,000 up front to collect far more in taxes above and beyond that, because we're missing.
Correct.
Because we're not focused
for
on
instance,
that
a
with the
neighboring
expertise.
community that I used to work in spends 3 times as much because they have 3 times as many accounts.
Yeah.
It may be because they have 3 times as many businesses, or it may be because we're missing
So this-
60% of the,
So in your
revenues.
opinion, would this probably pay for itself in at least 1 year, a maximum of 1 year?
I would expect this to be at least 4 times what we,
Okay.
it's a revenue generator.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, right. But this will,
And it satisfies the Department of Revenue's requirements that we make an effort to.
so it's driven by the state, 150 communities already employ this company, and we're leaving money on the table by not doing it. So well within 1 year, this will pay for itself.
I believe so. And the other part of this is, when we hired the new assessor, Mr. Bove, who, by the way, is working out exceptionally, the other issue we have is having myself and Mr. Caputi, who's semi-retired, but still does the yeoman's amount of field work because somebody has to do the administrative side of things in the office. When Mr. Bove came in November, I believe, since then I asked him, he's done over 2,500 inspections of properties in the city. There's 13,000. The state required us to do these every 10 years, and we were well behind where we were supposed to be. And I gave him the assignment, and he took off with it. So we are playing catch-up, and he is out there, you know, shaking the trees and, you know, doing what we need of him. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Counselor Squalia.
Thank you. Chris, continuing on the discussion for the contract services for personal property tax evaluation, will this largely affect businesses, would you say?
Yes, personal property in Fitchburg it's the tax on the machinery and equipment used in the conduct of business. There are certain things, and that's where having a company that does it professionally, you may go into a credit union or a financial institution, and you have to measure and list everything, but we can't tax them, they're exempt. But then if you go into an accounting office, you need to know that the computer is taxable, but the desk is not, or there's so many different nuances. In a lot of it, this came about in my personal experiences with the things that are really popular right now, breweries, marijuana growers. We go into marijuana growers, and half the stuff I try to Google search to figure out what it is or what they paid for it or what its value is. The firewall tells me I can't look it up because I'm looking up something that's nefarious or because we just don't know. So we put a value on it, and they don't file. The telltale sign of us being low in valuation is the company not filing to say you're too high. So then the question is, how high can we go before we're too high on the?
So what businesses will expect to see? Yearly, they get the personal property tax evaluation form where they're supposed to self-report their business machines or items or equipment. correct? And
Correct.
they'll still continue to see that form.
Yes, they'll see, it's called the formal list. It goes out annually. They fill out the form and they send it back. We do an initial review to see if anything's changed. If anything's changed that's obvious, one of us will go out, but again, there's only 2.5 people in the office. We'll go out and review it. This company would do all that. So they would, and part of it is a full field review. So over the course of 3 years, they'll be visiting every business. Some of them are very simple. They walk in and they say, you have 3 chairs, you know, a barber shop or a nail salon. And then some of them get fairly complex. If you go into one of the a manufacturer that's not a manufacturer designation, because those are exempt, if it's an LLC, then it could be the inventory, it could be the racks that they put equipment on, it could be the instruments that they use. So, I mean, personal property is the bane of the existence in the assessing world. Nobody likes to do it, but if we have to do it, we might as well do it properly, and I think this is a huge step forward.
So what business owners might see is potentially an increase or a decrease, you know, from the experts that are going to determine this in the guess value if they don't fill out the form from the city, or potentially an inspector comes physically to inspect?
Correct. There will be an inspector coming out once every 3 years for a third of the city's property. I also want you to understand, though, that a lion's share of the businesses in the city won't see a huge impact because most of our accounts are under $10,000.
God bless you.
So if you have an account that's $10,000, you have a $170 tax bill on your personal property. Those are the businesses that won't be impacted. It'll be the Unitils of the world that have equipment and assets that we just don't know what their value is. And that'll be where the biggest impact is, will be on the larger corporations.
The largest impact will be on the larger businesses.
Correct.
Thank you.
You will.
Councillor Boschman.
One question on legal costs and expenses. You went from 10 to 6 to 20, 20, 20.
Oh, down here. Council, we've been in the process of trying to settle several appellate tax board cases. So we've encumbered money over the past, which is why it went up and why it sits at 20. We're waiting for some outstanding legal fees because the Board of Assessors has our own counsel. We don't go through the city solicitor. The Board of Assessors, I believe it's through Mass General Law, has the ability to hire our own legal counsel. And our specialist specializes in real estate law.
So if we lose, we have to pay them? If you're over?
These fees are not for the settlement of a case. These are for the legal expenses accrued through whether we have to hire an attorney or an appraiser if we do end up going to
Oh,
court.
okay, all right, I understand now. Okay.
I have one more question.
Councillor Squalia.
We had eliminated the chairman's stipend for the Board of Assessors because we had contracted services, correct? But we don't have contracted services anymore?
We do not. We restructured, so now we have a chief assessor, an assessor, and the third member of the board is the head clerk in our office.
I'm just wondering if we need to revisit that because we, I don't know, maybe Calvin knows better.
I was going to say, I believe that, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the assessor and the chief assessor were kind of the same, except the chief assessor got an extra stipend for being chairman. And we dispense with that and recognize that the chief assessor is really department head and the compensation is within his salary.
And so now
or
it's in the
salary. It's just kind of worked in.
matrix.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you want to revisit it,
No.
You don't
No,
want
no,
us to
I'm
take
good.
it away, do you?
Thank you.
You're talking about taking it away.
Any further questions on the assessor's budget, assessor's department budget? Seeing none, let's move on.
Thank you. Page 13, the auditor's budget. The auditor's department added a third employee last year, in the middle of the year. So the increase in salary for that person this year is because we have a full year's salary here for the first time. The other increases are by ordinance.
Any questions on the auditor's budget?
Oop, nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
were you
sorry, I'm not
done?
finished.
No,
Working
go
my way
ahead.
down, I
Go right
apologize.
ahead.
Okay. There's a request for overtime in case it is needed in the department. There's also a budget line item for sick leave buyback to cover the retirement of the auditor in the coming year. Under auditor expenses, there's an increase to the travel and meetings because now there are 3 people in the office instead of 2, and the new person will need some training. And under audit services, there's an increase to the actuary services. This is because every other year we need to do a full OPEB evaluation, and this is going to be upcoming this year.
All right, any questions? Counselor Squalia?
Who is our new accountant? Jackie.
Jackie Scribner has joined the department.
Jackie Scribner? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Further questions on the auditor's budget?
Oh, did you?
All right, let's move on.
Thank you. Page 14, purchasing. Again, we have a situation where we have a new hire in the department, deputy procurement officer. I don't know if that person has started or not,
Yeah,
but
she did start
she
today.
started today. Okay, thank you. So the salary of $80,858 for next year is a full year salary for this person. The assistant procurement officer had left the department, and that position is not going to be filled. Instead, the deputy procurement officer position was filled because it was felt that the job duties, this was a more appropriate classification for the job duties that were needed in the department. The other increases under personal services are contractual or by ordinance. Under the expenses, not too many changes, a little bit more for dues and subscriptions, again, because of the additional person in the office. And training increased again because they have a new person in the office who's going to need some training.
Questions regarding the purchasing department? Counselor Squalia?
Who is our new deputy procurement officer?
Sam,
Sam? Good name. What's the last name?
no idea.
I'm sorry, I don't know who it is either.
Sam. Is it a man or a woman?
She.
It's a woman. I like it.
I think that might be a conflict of interest. Further questions on the purchasing department budget? Seeing none, let's move on.
Okay, information technology. Under personal services, again, contractual increases. The help desk technician, in addition, they hired this person at a slightly higher pay rate because of this person's experience and background and what they're expecting from him. Under software support, fixed costs, these are the maintenance and licensing fees for the software that we have. I spoke with the manager of IT, and he is expecting increases from his vendors. They have not been forthcoming with any precise amount, but they are all saying that there are going to be increases. So he has increased this budget, I believe, by 5%. Yes, his request is 5% over the prior year. Under office equipment and copiers, there's a $5,000 reduction because the city now owns the color printer and copier that was in the printer's office. It is in the basement of City Hall for use there. There's no more lease payment on it. All we do is pay for the per copy. So. Vehicle replacement and auto repair, that's just in case, that's just for the regular maintenance of the vehicle and if any repairs are needed.
All right, I have one question, actually. I see the digital content manager line was requested and not funded. Could you just describe what that position would have been hypothetically? What was it requested as?
I don't know a lot about it. I believe this person would have been responsible for the city website, responsible for social media. He would work not only with the IT department, but with community development in the mayor's office.
Okay.
I don't know if, is that,
Yeah, and also trainings.
oh, trainings.
Yes, that is a very
Okay.
important.
So that, yeah, that sounds like a very laudable position, but I understand why we can't fund it right now.
Yeah.
That said, I have Counselor Boishman.
Question on the, let's see, telephones. Is there a reason why it's 100,000?
I don't have any information on that, Counselor.
Anything further, Counselor?
No, not right now. I'll make these requests, Larry, when we time the cuts.
All right. Counselor Squalia.
Yes, just to clarify, the help desk technician, that's the one that we funded recently, 6 months ago or so. We funded from part-time to full-time?
I believe,
Yeah.
no, Calvin's saying no, sorry.
I'm sorry, which position did you say?
The help desk
I'm sorry, yes.
technician?
I'm sorry,
It was more than 6 months ago.
More than 6?
Yeah.
Like,
It is more because I'm being here with the city by 6 months, and he was before.
I think
He started,
it was funded in the last budget.
Pretty
it
close.
was funded in the last budget. The person started in October of '21.
October 21. Okay.
Further questions regarding the IT department? Seeing none, let's move on.
Parking. Let's see. Under personal services for parking, the parking control officer line item, the increase there is due to the fact that we had one parking control officer leave, and then we had a gap where we didn't have anybody in this current year, and now we have hired somebody, so the 41,144 for FY '23 is a full year of salary for that person. The overtime budget is there just in case, we need to have some overtime. Usually it's for snow removal, sidewalk clearing after a snowstorm. Under parking expenses, for the most part, level funded, except for the parking contract services. I had some indication from some of our vendors that there will be an increase in their services for the coming year. These services include various things, the deputy collector administering our parking tickets collection and marking at the registry. What else? Exterminator, pest control services, sprinkler and fire extinguisher inspections, and elevator maintenance and inspections. And the one thing that you will notice that is different in this budget, and this is the first time that we are actually using general fund monies to fund this. Over the past several years, the parking receipts have been decreasing. So it's been a trend, and that was exacerbated by COVID. We had businesses that would, purchase parking in our garages, no longer needed it because people were working at home. We had a period where we were not really enforcing parking on Main Street early in COVID, just to help the businesses there. So we're at a point where the monies that we've held aside for parking, the receipts, is not covering the full operation. So for this year, for the first time, we've taken the parking control officer's salary and charged it to the general fund, if you will, the $41,144. This person's main job is to write tickets, and the fines that are generated from this activity go into the general fund, so we thought that this would be an appropriate piece to pull out and fund with the general fund.
One question. What is the impetus behind the increase in overtime?
You mean the 800 this year instead of?
Yeah, it looks
as
like
opposed-
it's never been higher than 800 in the last 5 years or so, and
Again, sometimes it is snow removal. They'll come in early just to clear sidewalks, or they also finish up some of the plowing in the lots. The DPW will go through and do the plowing, but often there's cars there, so once the cars move, or the, other things that sometimes our parking control supervisor will stay late if we have a maintenance person or a repairman there, and they need somebody there. So that's also something that we do.
so this is one of those line items that's basically a just-in-case thing, and we
Yes.
expect that it will still come in around 800 or so, but we're budgeting 5,000 just in case something comes up?
Yeah, it's there just in case. We never know. Just
Okay,
yeah.
all
Thank
right.
you.
I saw hands over that way, I didn't catch whose they were. Counselor Boishman?
I just got one thing to say. I already talked to you over there,
Oh,
Ann.
that's true.
I think the city ought to start looking into charging more for parking. I know, but I'm just telling you.
Okay. Any questions regarding the parking budget? Oh, go right ahead, if
I
you'd
was
like
just going to
to.
say, Mr. Brooks reminded me that with the overtime, anything that's not spent in that overtime line item does go back into the parking receipts.
All right. Further questions about the parking budget? All right, moving on.
Tax collection and treasury. The increases under personal services, again, are ordinance and contract. You will see a reduction in the assistant treasurer collector line item. That is because our current assistant is resigning, and we've hired somebody new. She actually started today. So her salary is going to be a little less than the person, her predecessor, so that's the reason for the reduction there. Under expenses, for the most part, I've, again, level funded, or my request is level funded, except for postage. There's an increase there. We have gone over 100,000 a couple of times in the past, and also we've been notified of an increase in price from our bill printer. So that's also why I've increased it to $110,000. What's that? Oh, yeah.
Questions regarding the treasurer's budget? Counselor Boishman?
Postage. Why are we sending out with modern technology the way it is, with the cell phone, the computers, and everything else? Why are you sending out the receipts of my pension to me, or my pension, my receipts, when you can look it on my bank statement and say, yeah, it's going in my bank? Why are you sending me a postage stamp envelope for that reason?
For,
You know, like my check. And it's self-deposit, it goes into the bank. And I never even look, I just take that and heave it.
okay. I think you can get an email, you can get it via email if you like, Counselor.
Oh, you can send them by email?
That is an option.
So how come we don't do that to save money? They can knock that price down.
Mine comes down by email.
Yours comes down by email?
Mine comes by email. It can be done. You're not allowed to use your city email address. It has to be a personal email address.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know you could do that.
Contact the payroll office if you'd like to switch.
For the record, we've just been joined by Counselor Cragan. Welcome, good to see you.
Great to see everyone. Appreciate your patience. Oh, thanks, Councilor Boishman.
She wanted to sit right next to me.
Any further, I have next Counselor Squalia.
Thank you. For the clerical position, that's still two full-time equivalent position?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning.
The clerical position, that's two full-time equivalent for FY '23?
17.
That is, yes, it is. It's two people, correct.
So we have 7 full-time employees in the tax collection office?
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions regarding the Treasurer's Department? Seeing none, let's move on.
Debt service. The debt service, maturing debt and long-term debt interest are what we will be paying this coming year. That's already set. There will be no short-term debt interest on the city side. Certification costs and bond anticipation notes, that's what BAN stands for. 25,000, we usually just fund that, and it's usually a good starting point for us. Sometimes it does go over, but 25 is where we usually start. The last line there, reserved for capital spending. This is a line item where we can purchase capital items subject to appropriation by the city. This line item also serves as a placeholder for our future debt for a large project such as the Crocker School and the library, so that when these projects do come online, or the debt service for these projects comes online, it won't be such a radical increase to our debt service budget.
Questions regarding debt service? Councilor Squalia.
So the reserve for capital spending is kind of a cushion?
Yes.
And if we need to spend it, we spend it. If not, it goes to free cash.
Yes, it would go back to free cash. Mhm.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, let's move on. Making good time.
Page 19, community development. Again, most of the increases in the personal services is by ordinance or contract. The one exception to that would be the program management assistant, about midway down that section. The request is to go from part-time to full-time. This increase is going to be covered, or the increase in cost will be covered by ARPA funds. Lower down under expenses, marketing expense has been reduced to more reflect the actual costs that they're expecting. Administrative delivery expenses, the increase there. This covers the oversight of housing projects and related expenses. This line is 100% grant funded, so whatever they spend is covered by grants. Contracted services. So the budget request was for realtor commissions for the sale of 8 properties by the city. The appropriated, or the mayor's budget amount will actually cover the first few sales that are already in the works, and if any additional commissions are needed during the year, if we have any additional sales, a request will be made from available funds to cover those commissions. Demolition, this line item is for the demolition of 7 3rd Street. Not only is it going to be the demolition itself, but there is going to be some environmental abatement necessary there. Once the building is demolished, the plan is to pave over that lot as a parking lot for the Water Street corridor. DEP compliance. So the largest item in the department's request for $553,000 there was related to 80 Lunenburg Street, cleanup on that property. The city actually has a pending sale there, which means that the city is not going to be responsible for the cleanup. So the actual amount is being budgeted by the mayor, the $100,000, will take care of some other projects that we have. Community Development Department is also expecting, or has also received notice of a grant from the EPA. Mr. Skorowski is going to submit it to the council in June. So these funds will cover whatever other cleanup costs we have, and if we should exceed these monies, then again, the department will request an appropriation from available funds. Downtown cleanup. Whatever downtown cleanup efforts that the department is going to do this year are going to be covered by grant funds, so there's no request there. And down below that, there's several capital projects listed. These have not been funded in this budget, but I do want to mention that 2 of them have been recently funded by available funds, and that is the Oliver Street parking lot and the Riverfront Park stage design project.
And is it anticipated that there will be upcoming available funds requests for the remainder, or only some of them? What's the plan there?
I actually don't know, Counselor, I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Council President, we will certainly consider that.
All right, I'm just curious. Questions from council? Councilor Boishman.
First question on demolition. You're saying that you're budgeting 97.5. How come we're not using CBG funds? CBG, we don't use CBG? You didn't put no money into, for demolition in CBG?
We put a pause on demolition. If you recall,
Yeah.
Council, we did a lot of demolition when I first became mayor. First 3 or 4 years, we eliminated a lot of the blight that you see in the neighborhoods. We're taking a pause. Community Development Executive Director Skorowski feels it's better for us now to focus on some other aspects of the community. So we're still looking at demo, but we've really ramped it down a lot. In the future, that could easily change. We could take a look at using more available funds just to do that. That's what we did initially. It was CDBG, but it was also, in some cases, free cash.
Okay. Now, and the other thing, underneath, you said something about we have to pay the realtor. Doesn't he get a commission on the sales of the property?
That's what it is. That's
Oh,
that's the commission.
So if you get 100,000, you get 6%, you get 6,000, something like that?
Something like that, yes.
All right.
Right. But from an accounting standpoint, we have to show, if you sold it for 100,000 and he's getting 6,000 of it, we have to show 100,000 coming in and 6,000 going out. We don't show it as 94,000 coming in.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So we have to show the 6,000 as an expense.
Oh, okay. That's what I want to know.
Councilor Squalia?
Thank you. The program management assistant going from part-time to full-time covered by ARPA funds?
Yes.
How many years is that position covered by ARPA funds for full-time?
I think four.
The ARPA funds carry through to 2024, 2025, and I think we appropriated 50,000 for that position with the idea that we would see how far that went and then probably re-up it, depending on what its use was.
Okay, thank you.
And in 4 or 5 years, when that money runs out, we'll see where we stand.
Right. And then continuing on Councilor Bushman's suggestion of the demolition, and maybe where else in this? So we demolish a building, and we have the empty lot, and then it collects and if we don't sell it, it collects trash and overgrowth and trees. Is there somewhere in the line items where we are maintaining the city-owned property that we have, demolished a building?
Well, I don't think the intent is to sell the property in this case. The intent is to pave it over and create a parking lot for the Water Street corridor.
Yes, for that particular
Yes.
property. For the other properties that are still in city-owned hands, that are kind of a new blight.
Well, in some of our denser neighborhoods, they become part of the side yard sales program.
But until that point, do we have anything in the?
No, we do not. But to keep the lot clean?
Yes.
Okay. No, we do not.
Well, the Board of Health, I believe, and the
I mean,
Building
we-
Department do have some funds
No,
if there's
yeah.
a situation there
Do
that
what we can,
needs
but
attention.
We're not going to ignore it, but expending cash up front for it, no, we do not have that.
So potentially from the Board of Health budget,
Or the Building Department, yes.
or the Building Department. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Boishman?
Get back on Sam's Squad, the APRA funds. The way I understand it, the APRA fund, the reason why Tom wanted that person, because the paperwork is unbelievable, and that's the reason why. And we're not paying from our budget, if I'm not mistaken, it's coming out of the APRA funds?
Yeah.
Correct.
Correct.
It's coming out of the ARPA funds.
And the way I understand it, I thought he said 2026.
Could be 2026, yeah.
But I think the financial guy would know that, Mr. Chair.
Would you like to comment, Councilor Di Natale?
Finance Committee, 4 weeks ago, approved this out of ARPA funds. It was for $50,000 with the comment that ARPA will cover that through the course of the grant, at which point we won't necessarily need that position full-time for that purpose. It'll be reassessed by whatever mayor and city council is there and by 2025, 2026, or what they're going to do with the future of that. Yep.
Thank you. Further questions?
That's it for me, Council.
All right, if there are no further questions on the community development budget, on.
Facilities maintenance, page 20. So the increase to the Director of Facilities is an ordinance increase. He did request a maintenance craftsman, which was not funded in this budget. City Hall custodian increases is by contract. Below that is a senior center custodian and a library custodian. These are not new positions, they're existing positions. Mr. Karlstadt was proposing that all the custodial services be brought under the one department for consistency in services. That was not done in this budget at this time. Under library custodian, the clerical, he was requesting a part-time clerical. His thought was that the person who was the greeter could become full-time and work half-time for his office. As we discussed earlier, the greeter's position is not going to be funded in the coming year, and neither is this piece of it. Under expenses, there's an increase, contract services. Mr. Karlstadt wants to add pest control to the services, so that's the reason for the increase there. Under dues and subscriptions, this is for his membership in facilities management groups, his education and certifications. Software, he has maintenance scheduling software that actually came with the new City Hall. He would like to add to this for greater functionality, more functions. It provides things like computer-aided design, lighting control, and just a general building management system. So he'd like to increase that. Electricity, the city's contract, current contract for electrical supply is going to expire in December. We're currently paying 9 cents per kilowatt hour. That will go up to 13 cents per kilowatt hour in December, so that's the reason for the increase there. Advertising budget is just if he needs to advertise, maybe go out to bid for services or something like that. Heating fuel, a decrease of $7,500. It's actually just not costing as much to heat City Hall as we thought it would. So that's the reason for the decrease there. Repair and care. This is for repair and care of buildings other than City Hall. So he has done work over at the senior center and the library, for example. Repair and care City Hall. That is obviously for City Hall, the repair and maintenance of City Hall. The reason for the increase there is there have been just more repairs needed than expected. Also, the City Hall is now not under warranty anymore, so we would be responsible for any repairs that would be needed. And then tools and equipment underneath that, $2,500. That's just to replace or repair any tools or equipment as needed.
And before I open it up to questions, would you like to comment briefly on the requests at the bottom that didn't get funded?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I missed those. Those are capital requests for various things which are not funded in this budget at this time.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to cover
Thank you.
that
I'm sorry.
briefly. No, it's fine. Councilor Brochman.
The question to you is this: for a $25 million City Hall, you mean to tell me we get $30,000 worth of repairs still coming up? For $25 million, it's only what, a year and a half, 2 years in there?
Yeah, believe it or not, but
That's also maintenance, and it's also things such as cleaning supplies and paper goods, salt for the sidewalks, different things like that, too. It's not just repairs. Air filters.
Well, why would you? Oh, repair and care, okay, City Hall, I see that, all right, I understand now. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Further questions regarding facilities maintenance budget? Seeing none. I did have one question. So the senior center custodian and library custodian, if I'm understanding correctly, those positions are being funded, just not under this budget?
Correct.
Okay.
This department.
This,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. This department's budget. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I had that straight.
okay, thank you. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Paquette.
Spend to maintain the property.
I would.
Good evening, council. At this time, I'd like to present the police budget. The police budget appears on pages 21 through 24, and I'm going to go over some highlights of the budget as opposed to just doing every line, and then if you have any questions, feel free to ask. This year's budget increased from $8,633,000 to 156 to $9,188,091, or $554,935. A couple of the highlights of it, or the things that will stand out a bit, are under the personnel services or police services. Personnel services, the police chief, if you notice, the line item for the police chief has a fairly substantial increase, or as it would appear. This is due to the consolidation of line items to reflect total annual compensation and be more transparent. In the past, it was broken up into professional standards, holiday pay, Quinn bill, vacation pay, buybacks, and personal time reduction. So this is just to be more transparent and make it clear that his full compensation appears in one line item. And this also results in about a 2% increase in his overall salary. The second thing I'd like to highlight is a little bit further down under the patrol officers. There's an increase this year of 2 patrol officers, which are being funded by the COPS grant, to bring the department up to 64 uniformed patrol officers. They were at 62 last year. And along with the contractual increases, that's the largest increase in the budget is from the salary line item. And the fourth major thing I'd like to point out in this is the increase in the dispatch. This addresses staff shortages and also the recent contract settlement. So I believe that's on page 23. Under the dispatch section, you'll see an increase of $108,000. The chief's hopes are to get this up to 12. Last year, I believe they were operating with 8 individuals in the dispatch center, and they're currently at that. And with the difficulty of this stressful job, it's his hopes that they can get up to the full 12 positions, which they've budgeted for. That's pretty much it for police. If you have any other specific questions.
Questions on police? I will note that are you planning to speak separately on police non-personnel expenses, or are we just glossing over that because there isn't much change, which is fine, I'm just...
There wasn't a huge change in it. If there's anything specific, I could try to answer it. If not, we could reserve it for Chief Martineau to...
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to check before I opened it up to see if we were restricting the scope of questions or not. So to confirm for the council, questions are in order on any aspect of the police budget, not only the personal services part. Councilor Brochman.
On the personal services, you said the chief has got 2 full-time people coming on. My question to you is this: on those 2-time people that's coming underneath a grant, is there going to be, like some other grants that I have seen, that once he stays on there, he's on there for a period of time, and if there happens to be hard times in the city of Fitchburg, you can't touch them because they got to keep so many quotas of people? Do you know?
Could you
I'm presuming that there's, with grants, there's usually something about not being able to supplant, meaning you can't use grant-funded positions to replace somebody who was funded by the city budget. So to answer yes, I would say that once we start with these people, we can't get rid of them if we run into hard times without having some kind of difficulty. I think some of it can be if I don't anticipate that happening with these two because I think that we have been making every effort to maintain the staffing at the police department, but have been consistently understaffed because of the difficulty in finding trained personnel. It's a little different from the fire department where we have a civil service list and we're very able to quickly add people to it.
Yeah, I understand.
So I hear your concern, but I think in this case, it's not something that we're going to have to deal with.
Can I take that to the bank?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead.
The mayor says yes.
You can, so you're telling me and you're telling the public that if we come across,
And drive you.
if you come, you're telling me and you're telling the public that come hard times and there's a workforce reduction in the city of Fitchburg, the easiest group to get rid of is the DPW, and you won't touch them?
I won't touch the DPW?
At the
I'm not going to focus on any one group. I mean, what? This is hypothetical. Why are we even having this?
Well, I don't want to get bound into this discussion about, you got to keep 62 patrol people. and we
Council
have a hard
President,
time.
Council President, point of order, sticking with the topic.
Yes,
am
I was
sticking
just
with the
about.
topic.
Counselor?
Thank
When a point of order is called, it has to be ruled upon. And I was just about to say, we can discuss which grants to accept or not accept when they come before finance, but the line item itself is not really affected by what might happen in a hypothetical future. If you want to propose a cut to it, to not add those positions, you're
I
free
think-
to propose it, but
I think the grant has been accepted.
I believe so as well.
It's been
I'm just
accepted.
saying
We're
you
already-
can
we're
propose
already-
whatever cuts you like, but we can debate those things at that time. One moment, Counselor.
I'll wait for Mr. Chair over there to talk, to send me down the right path.
Counselor
No, Mr. Mayor, we've already voted on this grant for its acceptance in finance, and in my experience, the grant comes with specific terms and conditions that we have already accepted as a city council. We cannot renege on those terms and conditions now, or else they will not only pull the remaining grant funding, but they could pull even more to get the entire amount back because we are not satisfying the term. So if we spend $100,000 of a $300,000 grant for 2 police officers, the feds are well within their rights to not only get that $200,000 back, but they're going to ask for the other $100,000 because we are now in violation of the terms that we have accepted as part of their grant program. It's happened once before. It happened when we had the recession in 2010 with the fire department. We accepted 3 firefighters. It was $365,000, I think. We ended up cutting one of them, and the feds came back and took the whole $365 back. Even though we used some of it, they wanted it all back. So
Right,
ever since
so-
then, we've really refrained from doing anything with grants once we accept them.
Right, so, and as I said, the time to debate the merits of the grant was when it was in front of finance. So, that said, I have Counselor Schultz.
Yeah, I just, I see the deputy chief is listed. I just was wondering, this may not be a question that Assessor Paquette can answer. This may be more of a question for Chief Martineau, but I was just wondering, about the thinking with the deputy chief position, if, we have any succession plan in place. It hasn't been funded for some time now, and just wondering what the thinking is on that particular position, if anything has changed, or obviously it doesn't look like it has changed, but I'm just wondering if it'll change in the future. I don't know if anybody
I
can
can't
answer.
really speak to that, other than that when we were going through the process of the budget, the chief felt comfortable with having the structure that the department has now with the 3 captains, 5 lieutenants, 10 sergeants, and the 64 patrolmen or patrol officers that they have. So I don't believe he found it necessary to have a deputy chief, because I believe any of the 3 captains, I think, could rise to the occasion if that were necessary. But again,
Yeah, I guess the reason I ask is, the fire department has deputy chiefs in place, and, you would think that you'd want some type of succession plan where one person may be the person that would be, promoted to take or at least apply for the position of police chief at some point.
So I would encourage that any questions regarding the structure of the police department be brought to Chief Martineau's attention in the time between now and the budget vote. He probably can speak to that much more thoroughly.
Yeah.
Counselor Sequoia.
Thank you. On the COPS grant, the 59,000 reimbursement, that covers what portion of our new 2 patrol officers?
again, you would have to ask Chief Martineau that question. I honestly can't answer that.
To me, that looks about half.
About half? And, we had it, it's noted FY '17 through '19, and then it starts again in FY '23. Historically, do we have an idea if we will continue to be funded by this COPS grant for a number of years?
Usually it's a 3-year grant with a higher amount the first year, less the second, less the third, weaning off the grant.
And on the 4th year, will we?
4th year, usually you're
Potentially.
required to
Be
pay
assuming the
100%.
individual. Right.
We probably won't get it again, back to back.
Not that one, but, yeah, right.
Okay.
Counselor Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the largest increase here, that $500,000, it's stemming mostly from, or almost all from the patrol officers, the 64 full-time equivalents. So how many officers did we add?
We had 62 last year, so they're adding 2 this year. And then the contractual increases, I believe it was 2% and 2% over the last 2 years, which is retro, which gets funded through this budget. I believe it seems higher than it is, because last year, they didn't have the full complement. They had funded for 64 officers, 62 officers, but they were short-staffed, I want to say, do you know how, seven or at least 7 or 8 officers. So last year, they actually returned over $200,000 in salary to the general fund for free cash. So this budget seems like it's more substantial because the FY22 budget, what was it, 21? They've returned money that ultimately became free cash from not.
Okay. And the remaining from the two salaries towards the difference is those 2% increases retroactive of that
Yes,
500,000?
I believe so.
Yeah. When we budget, we usually, we budget for a full complement at 3rd step.
Right.
Or 4th step if we know, if we can kind of track who is on the 25-year step.
Right, so we're not,
They don't necessarily fill that all out, but we can't make the assumption that 2 of the positions or 3 of the positions will be vacant for the full year. Because in a sense, in doing that, the question then becomes, well, are you authorizing those positions or not, because you're not funding them?
correct.
So we fund them and then know that there's money coming back.
Correct, I'm just trying to do the math here of the difference between 2 full-timers and the 500,000 total. So I understand that we budgeted for a certain amount and we didn't have that certain amount. So we're not adding any positions, we're filling vacancies. I'm well aware of that, but
Okay.
my question stems from, we don't pay 2 officers $500,000 in a year.
No, we don't.
So my concern is the clarification, so that the 2% increase was what I was looking for, so thank you.
Okay.
Counselor Di Natale.
So the actual column for FY '22, that's what we are actually projecting to spend, correct?
The FY22 is a projected amount that I did in January, February,
Right.
and
So-
it has since changed.
So if you have a department like the police department, who's notorious for returning money back because of the unfilled positions due to a whole host of factors that the chief has explained many times over, what this page would suggest is not in fact reality, in that 22 is an actual, but 23 is like a reset, as if Chief Martineau's got all those positions filled
For the full year.
for the full year. So it's partly the salary increases for the last 2 years, it's partly the addition of the COPS grant, and then the remainder is just getting us back to his contingent 62 fully funded officer staff that he may or may not be able to fulfill because of the ebb and flow of retirements and training and all that stuff. It's a reset. So some of that increase is really just putting us back to where we were at the start of FY '22 before we got better understanding of what our spending was going to be because of the hiring. We're just resetting it because we want him to hire every position he's got, correct? So that's part of the increase too. I don't know if that made it clear or not, but I tried. Thank you.
Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. On Councilor Cruz's question of additional personnel, we show 2 additional patrol officers, but on page 53 in the staffing levels, it notes that we have 2.5 additional personnel.
Catch, that's actually a typo. There were, I believe Chief Martineau said it would be 101, because it wasn't 99.5. I believe that was 99 with the additional 2.
So we actually had 99 in FY '22.
I believe it was 99, and it'll go to 101.
And FY '23 should be 101.
Yeah,
Okay.
I might actually have the notes on that. So I'm
Thank you.
sorry, it was 100 last year, and it'll go to 102.
Okay. It was 100, not 99.5. And it will be 102. Thank you. That is all.
You're welcome.
Further questions regarding the police department's budget? Seeing none, let's move on.
Okay, next I'm presenting the fire department. This is located on page 25 to 26. The budget increased from $5,669,895 to, that's not right. I'm sorry. Let's start over again with that. So the budget increased from $8,297,369 to $8,418,685, for an increase of $121,316.
What page are we on? I'm sorry.
25.
Page 25,
Oh,
sorry.
25. Wait, we
So-
skipped to fire?
This is the
Yes.
fire department, correct. So the highlights of this budget are no new positions have been requested, they're retaining their current staff. The other thing to note is sick leave buyback. There was an increase in that, and that was to cover 2 retirements. And then the other thing the chief had mentioned, one of the other things he had mentioned to highlight is number 4, fire prevention. It's number 4 in my head, but fire prevention is seeing a major staff changes. They have 2 retirements leaving the office requiring on-the-job training. They also have a 3-person staff which currently handles smoke detectors, inspections on real estate sales, building plan reviews and new construction, fire investigation, and in the public education process. So that department's basically going to be existing firefighters that are going to be transferring into that department. Anything under benefits and stipends, as well as salaries, were contractual. They have not settled their contract yet, so all salaries listed here are based on the FY '22 contract scales. The other major things to point out are the department requested 2 new vehicles on page 26. Those were under capital equipment and vehicles. Those that were not funded at this time. There were 2 new SUVs that they were requesting. And also, the building improvements was requested at $500,000, and that would probably be more appropriately funded through future capital spendings as they are deferred maintenance on facilities.
All right, before I open it up to the council, I do have one question. The $3,900 increase to the fire chief position, is that the same story as with the police chief, just rolling in benefits into the basic line item? Or is that an actual increase in compensation?
Was that the
Oh,
2.5%?
That's the 2.5%. That's rolling his, it's just a 2.5%. The figure of 156.6 was the original budget, and that was tied to when the ordinance was changed.
And
I think it's a little bit less than previous. We have to remember that the previous fire chief had, 26 years of service, and so had slightly higher compensation than what the more recent chiefs have had.
Right. I'm just trying to peg the increase over last year. So that's,
The increase over last year is just the 2.5%, I would say.
and the 2.5% in this instance is a step increase, or?
It's the ordinance change that the council is in the process of approving.
Gotcha. Okay, just making sure. I got a couple questions about it, so. Questions from council? All right, seeing none, let's move on.
Building inspectional services on page 27. Most of the increases here, all the increases as far as personnel services are contractual or the ordinance that you were speaking of a few moments ago. So these would be all the salaries that were increased. The biggest change in this budget that you'll notice, there was a decrease under assistant inspectors. This was for the temporary plumbing inspector. So what they've done is they've been in the process of hiring a permanent full-time plumbing inspector. So you'll see that the increase in the plumbing inspector budget went up from 17,000 to, or I'm sorry, 95,000 from 28,000. That was due to the past plumbing inspector being out for a substantial amount of time on leave and then ultimately retiring. So it's just an adjustment to the figures for the members of the department. Everything else on here, I believe, was contractual. And the only other thing on here was there was a request for an automobile, which the council has already addressed. That was the wire inspector's vehicle, which was totaled in an accident. So that will be the $69,000 request, which ultimately ended up being taken off the request. One thing to note, in speaking with the building inspector, is their vehicles are starting to, or they are aging, they're all 2014s. So he wanted to mention that you'd probably be seeing in years to follow a request for at least one vehicle to replace them as necessary. And that's the building inspectional services.
Questions regarding building inspectional services? Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. Have we hired a new full-time plumbing inspector yet, or is it just we're preparing for that hire?
I'm not certain if they've been hired, but I know it's very close to happening, from my understanding. I don't believe they've started yet, but.
Okay. The building inspectional contracted services, we have had, a consistent figure in the past. Is there a reason we're not doing any contracted services for building inspectional services expenses?
You would have to speak to.
That was the line we used to pay for digitizing all of their records. That project is done. So now whatever is being done on a regular basis, and there's no added cost.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's all. Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, we can move on. I will ask that, as I see we're going into DPW, I would ask.
Yes, Mr. President, I was going to say that being a gentleman of a certain age, I would appreciate a brief recess to take care of some business.
Yes, that was one thing. The other thing was I was going to ask that we do each sub-department separately, just because they are quite different in scope and so forth. But yes, we will have a 5-minute recess and then return.
Thank you. Thank you.
Not a problem. We are now returning to session, and the finance team may proceed as ready.
Thank you, Mr. President. So it's my turn to talk about the Public Works budget, and I understand your request. I'll do this kind of page by page, so
Excellent.
that'll keep it somewhat separate. In personal services, the budget accounts for steps and assumes that positions are filled for the full year. In FY '22, there were vacancies in the commissioner, the assistant city engineer, and the civil engineer positions at various times, so those positions were not fully spent. There is a subtraction, which is in the red, for enterprise funds, and that's a subsidy that recognizes the work done by the Public Works employees for the water and wastewater enterprises. And specifically, that in this case, that would be for the business manager and for the civil engineer. Stormwater, City Council recently funded that for $400,000 via appropriation from available funds, which is similar to what we've done in the past few years. This is my number 3 revenue comment. The city will begin restarting the process of creating stormwater fees to help fund stormwater work. That was something that was just beginning to be discussed prior to the pandemic, and it's just been put on hold for a few years as we've worked our way through the pandemic and through personnel changes within the department. We also need to recognize with stormwater that we're shifting costs from the wastewater budget to the general fund, and also increasing costs due to the duplication of infrastructure underground. That is, we have both stormwater pipes and wastewater pipes. So this is an evolving situation. I know wastewater is paying for the combined sewer separation capital work, but once the separation is done, it becomes the city or the general fund's responsibility to pay for stormwater. So those are fees that will be coming up at some point in the future. So that's it on page 28.
Any questions on the admin and engineering subdepartment? Councilor Boschman.
On the stormwater fund,
Yes, sir.
is the city, I know you're talking about years to come, maybe next year, or maybe this year, maybe the start of this year. Are they going to put that into a revolving fund like we have the wastewater fund and the enterprise fund and the enterprise?
To answer you, I don't know. It depends on how much the fees are and what we're trying to operate with that.
And Councilor, that would come in front of us, presumably as an ordinance when...
It would be an acceptance, it would be acceptance of the statute to create the
Yes.
enterprise fund.
So that would come before us, and we could get all the details on the program when it is formally proposed to us.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you, Mr. Briggs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right?
Further questions regarding admin and engineering? I've got Councilor Squalia.
Calvin, you were mentioning, we've been talking about a potential source of revenue for the stormwater. Is that reflected in the budget?
No, it is not. No, it's just, prior to COVID, there were some very preliminary conversations about what to do and how to do it. I would say preliminary in the sense that they were with the mayor in his office, just saying, okay, here's some things we could do. I believe there was discussion about having some kind of presentation to city council, and that meeting was held, I think, in early March of 2020, and a week later, we were shutting things down. So that's where we stand.
Okay. The civil engineer is funded at 45% of the general fund?
Correct.
And in FY '22, it was proposed to be funded at 55% of the general fund? Just wondering what the thinking is in those funding sources.
Okay, so the civil engineer and the business manager are split between the general fund, the water fund, and the wastewater fund. And I believe the civil engineer is, if I recall right, is 45 general fund, 5% water, and 50% wastewater. I think that's how it's split.
And that changed from last year, just,
Last year, I would have to go back to my notes to see what it was last year. The reason that, if you look at the projected, it's only 30,000 is because that position was vacant for quite some time this year.
okay, that's all, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on administrative and engineering? All right, moving on.
So page 29, personal services, this is for the highway division, reflects step increases in the contract settlements for FY '20 and '21. Actually, I guess it's FY '21 and '22, which was recently approved by City Council. We still need to account for any additional costs in FY '23 once the contract is signed. We again are hiring seasonal laborers to help with summer when workload increases. And I think we've also found it's a good way to try out workers to see if they are capable and could possibly shift over to being full-time employees, because we have had to work hard to recruit. I would also point out, you notice there's a reduction that the mayor made in the labor budget. The DPW commissioner had asked for funding for another crew of 4 people, a supervisor, or a foreman and 3 laborers, to boost the highway division. And at this time, we were not able to fund that piece. The expenses basically reflect increasing costs that we're running into, plus additional dam repairs and maintenance.
All right, questions, and I want to specify we're going page by page here, so if you have questions on the remainder of the highway account, the highway capital, we will get to that on the following page. Questions on highway personal services and highway services and supplies. Councilor Genatali.
Yes, under the labor, you said that the DPW's budget was cut by one person because it wasn't funded by the mayor. Was that position in place
Well,
this budget?
It was cut by one crew.
Right, was that crew member on the force?
Okay. The request was cut. The request was cut, or the request was reduced.
So the budget wasn't reduced?
The request was reduced, no, the budget is the mayor's budget.
Does the budget this year have that position in it?
No, the budget does not have those 4 positions, correct?
Thank you.
Further questions on these 2 segments? Councilor Cragan.
Thank you. I noticed that there is a jump from fiscal year 22-23 for both motor vehicle repairs and traffic sign maintenance. I see Commissioner Erickson isn't here, and I certainly would ask him.
Yep.
But what the are we sort of getting ahead of the vehicular side of things? Because again, having lost the mechanic, I guess it was a year and a half ago before COVID. Does this reflect sort of, are we getting more vehicles, or are we able to do more repairs, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Okay, hold on. What, you said traffic? Traffic sign, motor vehicle?
Yeah, motor
I got it.
vehicles
At 25,000.
repairs, it's an increase of
So-
25,000.
All right, so on motor vehicle repairs, I believe he's getting has an older fleet, and he's running into more repair work that has to be done. I know the council just appropriated funding to buy some more equipment and more vehicles.
Right.
But I think there's, as he expressed, he's concerned about having some things for next winter.
Yeah.
Because of the time delays. So I think he's having to spend money on repairs on vehicles that he would rather replace, but this is where he is. Traffic sign maintenance, I believe, is signs, stop signs.
Sure.
No parking signs, those kinds of things, and I think he's looking for more money just to do more work in that regard.
Oh, okay, so replacing in all
I would say yes, the traffic signs would be, as I understand it, no parking signs, stop signs, slow signs,
Okay.
those kinds of things. Yep.
Now, before I go to Counselor Fleming, on that subject, the traffic signs, does this traffic sign line item, oh no, I'm sorry, it says maintenance. I was going to ask if it includes the new signage for Main Street or if that's encompassed in the separate appropriation for Main Street.
I'm assuming that any new signage for Main Street would be part of the funding that's already been appropriated.
That's what I assumed. I just
The
wanted to
grants of the
confirm.
funding, yep.
Counselor Fleming.
Yeah, I was just looking at the increase for the pothole repairs. Is that figure kind of low? It seems like we're getting so many more requests, and with the increase in cost, that number seems kind of low to me.
It's an increase. I am going to say that they could be coming back for additional appropriation later in the year, given the fact that oil prices are going up, so asphalt would be increasing. So I would expect that there could be some additional needs there. But again, some of these things are starting points for him.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Counselor Giantelli.
Yes, on the vehicle equipment for the DPW, how much money did the Finance Committee and the City Council just approve for replacing parts of the fleet of the DPW?
I want to say 960,000.
Thank you.
Did I do it right?
You actually are 60,000 over what I was going to say, so
I think it was
I'm even
960.
happier with that.
Yep.
And yes, I just wanted that point brought up.
Right.
It's a large fleet, we're cutting into it as best we can.
Counselor Boschman.
I want to go back to the potholes. Since the team is out in front here, can you get I know you can't do it, but could you get for us a breakdown of what it's costing the taxpayers to keep on going back over to fix up potholes and that, time and labor and material for last year? Could we get that information?
I can ask. I'm not sure that it's available in that particular
Format?
detail. We could certainly figure out what it is for the pothole repair supplies, which is would be the asphalt. As to the time for labor and all that, I'm not sure. We have to see what it is.
And
I'm just going to say, kind of in defense of the Public Works Department, I think this winter was particularly difficult
Yeah.
because of the way the weather progressed, that we had ice storms and rain and hot, cold and hot, and cold and hot. So a lot of things just transpired that made the potholes much worse than a normal year. And I think that was evidenced by the grant that was just discussed at Finance, the RAP grant, which was acknowledging that this winter was particularly tough.
Don't get me wrong when I ask the question. I just want to know I don't care if you want to go a year before that.
Right.
I just would like to know what we're paying for time, labor, and material.
Right, I'm not sure, we can ask, I'm not sure that they have would have that information.
And I want to make sure I understand this right, because I know we're going to be discussing the budget. The DPW commissioner asked for a full-time floor crew, added 4 more people on it, and we turned them down, right?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, we're not, the mayor's not funding that at
We're
this
not
time.
funding that positions.
Correct.
We're not funding the positions, councilors. Remember that.
That's correct.
All right. I want to make sure we understand where we stand here.
Before I go to Counselor Squalia, I just want to check, Counselor Fleming, do you still have your hand up for an additional question, or is it?
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay, I thought it was just left up, but I wanted to make sure. Counselor Squalia.
Thank you. Calvin, you had mentioned the dam repairs and maintenance line, but I missed if we have a specific plan for the increase in cost for dam repairs and maintenance.
I'm not sure that, I'm not aware of what it is. I believe that there are some dams that need some work pretty quick or inspections. And we're at a point where we need to take care of some of that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Councilor Gianatolli.
I have two questions. One, do you have any idea how many miles of paving we can do for 150,000?
No, I don't know that.
Is it a half a mile, quarter of a mile, 1 mile? Mayor, do you
Miles
know?
about a mil, 800,000.
So maybe,
But depends on what you're doing also.
Yeah,
You're
the
putting in curbing,
sidewalk.
you're putting in sidewalks,
so
you know, I mean,
a couple hundred feet?
you're putting in concrete sidewalks, even more money.
Okay.
Right.
And to the earlier statement, my question is, how much money was requested to fund that crew?
I don't know, what was the number on it?
The amount of the change, the amount of the change was 193,000.
Okay, so let's say 200,000. So if counselors are not happy with that crew not getting funded, what is their option?
So on any of this, the option is you find $200,000 in cuts in the budget and request the mayor to fund those positions.
And that's in 2 weeks, right? That's in 2 weeks we get to do that?
Yep.
Whatever
That's,
the-
1 week.
whatever-
1 week, oh, good.
whatever the
I
council
can't wait to
schedules.
see them. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, you got a question?
Yeah, I don't have anyone else on the list. Go ahead.
Okay. And since that was already brought up and I didn't start this, I just want to point out that we are hiring somebody. And it seemed like we found more money for that position. Isn't that funny, isn't it? That we hire another person and another place she's put it in for?
Counselor, if you want to cut another position to
Oh, you
fund
bet your
more
dollar boots we will
DPW, go
be.
right ahead and submit the cut, and we will debate it at that time. Further questions on the DPW's personal services and supplies budgets? Seeing none, let's move on.
On page 30, the top part is highway capital, which was not funded, although I will point out that the equipment, there was a bunch funded in, I guess, a recent city council meeting. Traffic signal upgrades, street light upgrades were funded. The Oak Hill Road Bridge design was funded. Is that in Ward 2?
Oh, that's in Ward 2.
That's in Ward 2, okay. And then street repair, we funded paving for Industrial Road and Clarendon Street. Is that in Ward 2?
That's Ward 2.
Oh, it is, okay.
The mayor knows where his votes are.
Can we reconsider any of these?
You, Mayor. The next section is snow and ice. That's funded at $550,000, which is what we have been funding for the third year in a row. We cannot go lower than that because we then run the risk of having issues if we try and deficit spend on snow and ice. That is an amount that should be budgeted closer to $900,000 to $1 million a year to get at the kind of minimum amount of snow and ice work that we would have to do. The best way to do that is to increase it about $50,000 a year each time, and in the past couple of years, we just haven't had the room in the budget to do that, given some other increases that we're trying to absorb. The traffic signals and street lights maintenance, there was no real big change. You'll notice that in street light maintenance, the mayor did reduce the request from the department head by $75,000, and that was basically because we put $100,000 toward street lights and $100,000 toward traffic signals. And just trying to even that out.
All right.
questions?
And I've got a couple quick questions, clarifications before I open it up. First, on the capital expenses, just to confirm, it is standard operating procedure to not fund the capital expenses in the budget and then to come to the council with appropriations for them.
Correct, because the capital items are considered one-time expenses. So if we can work it in the budget, that would be ideal. Generally, we don't, so we're taking them out of available funds. Now, what we do have in the budget is the reserve for capital expenditures that we're using to create space within our debt service. So in a sense, we are funding some of this through that mechanism. We just aren't identifying what those projects are.
Right, leaving it flexible so that as things come up and become more urgent, we can decide where to spend it.
Correct.
And the other question is, the 458,000 that's showing up as a reduction in the snow and ice budget from last year, that's not actually a reduction, right? It's that we budgeted a similar amount last year and then spent out of free cash to bring it up.
So that's showing where we were in terms of total spending, but the original budget was 550.
Gotcha. Just confirming. All right, I'm sorry. Who had hands? Counselor Squalia?
Thank you, Calvin. Regarding highway capital and regarding our free cash spending of the 8 million that we had in free cash, can you kind of mentioned a little sporadically, but could you please just go in a row, kind of which ones of the requests that we actually funded from FY22 free cash of the highway capital? Like the traffic signal upgrades and the street light upgrades were funded?
So the street signal upgrades and the street light upgrades were funded.
Oak Hill Road Bridge.
Oak Hill Road Bridge was funded.
600,000? Oak Hill?
And I'm confused.
515,000, I think it was.
Oak Hill Road was 575.
You know, this is something for the DPW commissioner, but my office can provide you with a list of what we funded. All right, capital needs, trucks, whatever equipment was needed, road repair, whatever it might be. All right, we can do that. We'll do that before the next meeting. How's that?
Well, that would be great. I
All
was
right.
just wondering specifically within the request in this budget.
Right.
And I'm going to say that the requests were made back in January, February.
Right.
And so there have been some modifications since then.
This one was funded. Oh, it's funded.
The Boulder Drive water main replacement was funded?
I don't know.
Water main,
0.1?
no.
Not in the budget, but
Water main replacement would have been through the water department, and I think some of that was there was design work done by ARPA funds.
All set, Counselor?
yes, thank you.
Counselor Brochman?
One question that bothered me last year. As a city, are we going to make sure that we have enough ice, rock salt for us to put down this year, not run out? I mean, if you get a special deal on
No,
it,
Counselor, we're going to try to we're going to take the least we can.
easy now, Mayor, you're starting to get hot in the car.
You know, because
Easy.
it's
Slow down.
yeah, we'll make sure that the DPW commissioner is aware of what he needs to do. And probably already knows it.
No, I'm just saying that because I read in the paper sometime, Mayor, that you can buy rock salt cheap some places. They get it real cheap in the summer.
Don't
and they
trust
stock
everything
up.
that you see. Don't trust everything that you see in the newspaper.
It's not.
Well, it's got to be true because I saw it on TV, Channel 5. So,
All set?
okay.
Counselor
Just
Gianatolli?
one clarification on the capital. It's over 2.5 million we've done on this list. We did the equipment, we did the, some building reno, we did the traffic signal, the street light, we did the Oak Hill Bridge design, sidewalks and ADA ramps and the street repair. Those we've already done. But my question is, because I'm very curious, this is saying the mayor did not fulfill a request for street paving, for example, for 1.1 million. Was that 1.1 million budgeted at the start of FY22? Was there a budget for
no,
street
because that
repair
was
in the
the
FY22 budget at the start of the year?
That was the request.
That's the request.
That's
That's
the
not
request.
what they were budgeted.
Correct.
Excellent, thank you.
Any further questions on this portion of the Public Works budget? All right, moving on.
Okay, page 31 is the cemetery division. The personal services, again, reflects step increases. Last year in the budget, there was approved a position that was 1/3 cemetery, 1/3 parks, 1/3 recreation. That position was never filled. This year, the cemetery requested a full-time clerical position just for that division. The mayor did not fund that position, so that's what that minus $47,817 figure is. I would also point out that we reduced the overtime a bit to reflect a more realistic number in terms of what they have done historically. And we also funded summer help. They're looking for 5 people, and obviously the cemetery does more work in the summer than during the winter. So it's a good place, and again, a good place for people to try things out. The capital items are requested but not funded. And I just want to talk about a couple of them because I think it's important for City Council to be aware of these projects that are out there that at some point are going to come back here for action. One is the cemetery expansion. Well, let me say, the cemetery expansion at Forest Hill was recently funded through available funds and through grants. But I would point out that there's a request, has been in the past, request for works on the mausoleum. The mausoleum roof leaks and is causing problems, and that's something that will have to be addressed in the next couple of years. The other is the expansion of the new cemetery, which I believe is scheduled to be across the
Yes.
across Ringe Road from the current cemetery.
Electric Avenue. Electric Avenue.
Electric and
Cross
Rollstone.
Electric.
Cross Electric, yeah. Somewhere. Sorry, this is, Counselor, you're right, I should be from Fitchburg, right?
That's right.
Okay.
But that's not my ward, that's Council Kutcher's ward.
Oh, okay. So there is going to be a need for a cemetery expansion in the very near future. The short-term answer is to expand the current cemetery, and that was, I think, we just appropriated $25,000 to do, or there was a grant acceptance earmarked to do $25,000 to build a wall to expand and pick up another 700 sites. But we're getting to the point where the city's going to have to do something about a cemetery expansion. The city is required to have a place where people can bury bodies, dead bodies.
Loved ones.
And
Thanks for the clarification.
it's getting late.
Must be tired.
So I put that out there.
You had my attention.
So I put that out there just as something that we have to be aware is going to have to be addressed at some point. And if we kick the can down the road, it's going to cause a bigger mess than we need. With that being said, I'm going to be quiet and answer any questions you may have.
Councilor Brochman.
Just want to say, Kelvin, and to the mayor, in all fairness to the mayor. When I was doing my homework the other day, they talked to me if there's a cemetery. They said it's going to cost millions of dollars to go across the street, not just a couple $100,000. They're talking about millions.
Yes, they are.
No dispute.
And they said
You're
that,
absolutely right, Counsel.
well, I do my homework.
Oh, well, there you go.
And they also said that the way it looks, it'll be like Laurel Street, up on a hill. It's not level, it's hilly.
Has its challenges as well. Right.
So I think that,
Think about the Laurel Hill Cemetery. Think about topographically, the Laurel Hill Cemetery. It's like
yes,
this.
I know.
It's, I mean, granite walls that are moved. It's just, it's got its own challenges. That's what I have to report. The area that for the new expansion for Forest Hill, not ideal, but it really is the only location in the city that's available. And because of that, it's going to cost more, because it'll have to be terraced once again, because the nature of where we live. Everything's a mountain around here, you know, and a valley. So
Notice to the voting public.
Yeah.
Fitchburg has lots of hills.
hills, yeah.
Does that answer your question, Counselor?
Oh, my question?
Yeah.
No, I was just informing Kelvin what they told me yesterday
Gotcha.
at the meeting, because I did tell the commissioner about the place on South Street, that calls all park and the dog, the hospital for animals in between there.
Yes, I recall
That was at the
discussing that at
So,
finance.
it's got some hill and granite, so it's not worth it.
All right, Counselor Van Hazinga?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Brooks, you mentioned the hybrid clerk position that was going to be shared that wasn't filled. Is that position included in this budget?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Further questions on the cemetery budget? All right, moving on.
Page 32 is the Parks Division. Again, the personal services reflects step increases and summer help. What I would point out is that the commissioner made a request to establish and fund the position of superintendent of parks, which would give the Public Works Department 3 superintendents, the highway superintendent, cemetery superintendent, and park superintendent. The mayor did feel it was an important position, but currently there is not room in the budget to create it at this time. And what I would say on that, as we're going through, there are a number of positions we've talked about that have been important, that people have had a desire to fill. We started off with the receptionist at City Hall. We've talked about the data manager. We've talked about a crew in the DPW. We've talked about a cemetery clerical person. I think there's one or two others that I've kind of forgotten about. The issue is that you have to find funding. And so if the council feels that that's an important need, any of these positions is an important need, the goal then becomes, how do you find a reduction in the budget that could create funding to get a new position filled? And when I talk, in this case, I'm talking about a cut in the budget, and the cut has to be a legitimate cut. It can't be, we're going to, reduce police overtime by 100,000 so we can add a position, because the reality is that cut in the police overtime isn't going to make it through the year. They're going to be looking for more money later on. So I guess that's the challenge. That's the challenge that we've been through as we've worked on the mayor's budget and come to this point. If the council is looking to do something else, while you can't add, you can certainly say, well, if we make this reduction and this reduction, Mayor, will you give us this or that position? And that's under your, he can say no, but that's kind of under, that's a way of working it. For the Parks Department, the expenses are even with the prior year.
So on the subject of funding and cuts and so forth,
Yes.
not because I intend to propose a cut, but just because it kind of jumps out at me on the page and will probably jump out at whichever of our constituents peruse the budget. I notice the increase from 3 to 4 full-time laborers is approximately equal to what the cost of the superintendent would have been. Would you like to talk briefly about how the decision was made between those two positions?
So the increase from 3 to 4 was from the FY21 to FY22 budget. A normal crew is 3 laborers and a foreman. And so I think if I'm remembering the FY21 budget discussions, we were not filling positions that happened to be vacant. And the Parks Department did have a vacancy at that time, and so we elected not to fill it. Once we got through the pandemic and began to work on an FY22 budget, we were able to get back to filling that position. So the 4 FTEs has been pretty steady through the tenure of that department. I do believe they had somebody out on a workers' comp, so they were short-staffed in that sense. But the funding has generally been for a full crew.
All right, thank you. Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. Why is it that we fund the parks director or the recreation director, not in the parks, personal services, public works budget, but we fund it out of the human services budget in a separate recreation
So-
line item.
So kind of jumping ahead, the Recreation Department, the Recreation Director deals with the activities that are going on in the city, in the parks, and those kinds of things. The Parks Department, or if there were a superintendent of parks, would be responsible for the park itself, for getting the grass cut, trimming the trees, doing whatever sweeping has to be done, maintenance of the property. The Recreation Director is handling the activities there or at other locations.
So our,
Program versus capital maintenance, I guess I would say.
so our recreation director is not a parks director. He doesn't
They
direct people?
I guess I would say in an ideal situation, they would be two separate positions. I think here, the Recreation Director functions a
As-
little bit as involved in parks supervision, but I also believe the cemetery superintendent does some of that as well, and the highway superintendent does some of that as well.
The cemetery superintendent, the highway superintendent, and the recreation director all help to facilitate the maintenance of our parks.
I believe that's the case, yes. It's a group effort.
Okay.
Superintendent of Parks was a position that existed pre this administration. And I'm not faulting certainly the mayor at the time, they had to make some tough decisions. But we've always had a park superintendent to physically deal with the parks themselves, the cutting the grass, and putting it in some kind of a schedule. What happened was that position was cut many years ago. And it's a position, as I said, we've always had. I wanted to bring that back because I think there's a need, obviously. We're just having difficulty making the numbers work. The parks director the recreation director has been acting as the park superintendent. It's an overload. It's not appropriate. So maybe things will change. That's another position that maybe will change in a month or two, that we can take another look at it. I hope we can.
Okay.
Councilor Di Natale.
The park superintendent position was cut in the FY09 budget. It was the first budget of Mayor Lisa Wong. One of the few things she did that I agreed with, but we had to cut everything.
Right.
So that was cut 13 years ago. One of the first cuts we had to do, and it hasn't been back. So I just wanted to give that historical context. Thank you.
Questions regarding the parks budget? All right, moving on.
At this point, I'll turn the presentation back over to Ann Cervantes.
Thank you. Page 33, Board of Health. Under Personal Services, I'm going to start out by talking about two line items at the same time. The second line down, the Deputy Director, which is a new position this year. And then 5 lines below that, the Sanitary Code Inspector, 100% general fund, which you will see was not funded this year. The person who held that inspector's position retired this past year, and instead of filling this position, Director Curry would like to create the Deputy Director position at the same pay rate, so there's no increase to the budget. The Deputy Director would assist him and would also do inspections as needed. Now, in between those two, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit. There's a clerical principal clerk, which is a new position this year at $34,087. This person would be working with the current principal clerk, who will be retiring at the end of fiscal year ’23, learning the position. And in addition, this person would also be assisting with street outreach. This pay rate is step 1 for this grade, and it will be 75% covered by grant funds. Just below that, the Food and Milk Inspector, you see a significant increase for fiscal '23. That's because this position was filled in the middle of fiscal '22. So this is the full year, the $70,627 is the full year salary for this position. Let's Further down, the Regional Sanitary Code Inspector. This is not a new position, but it hasn't been filled in recent years. The city has just received a Public Health Excellence Grant, which requires that a regional inspector be hired for the work. This position will be 100% grant funded. Homeless outreach stipend, a little further down for $10,000. The substance abuse coordinator is going to be taking on these duties to supervise the outreach workers. The outreach workers are going to be contracted by the city, and they will be paid out of grant funds. Weights and measures inspector. We've had a few applications, but no one has been hired for this position. The position is, being funded for next year in hopes that we will find somebody. And then down there, emergency personal services, there's no need for this line item anymore, so there's been no budget request this year.
All right. Any questions regarding the Board of Health budget? Counselor Boschman.
I got a question on the food inspector. Why, since he just started, why is he starting at 70,000 if he just starts? Why doesn't he start like at 60,000 and work your way up?
I don't know, Counselor. I wasn't involved, obviously, in the hiring of this person, so I don't know how the pay rate was determined.
And my other question was the homeless outreach stipend.
Yes.
ARPA, we generate ARPA funds. Do we have any kind of guidelines to see how the people that we're hiring are doing? Maybe the mayor can answer that wonderful question?
They work under the Board of Health, Steve Curry and Susan Christensen.
Yep.
That's who manages those folks.
Right.
So they're being supervised. Matter of fact, they're doing a terrific job, I
Yep.
think.
I didn't say there wasn't, I just asked
Oh,
the
no,
question.
I know, but they have. I mean, it's a difficult job.
Challenging.
And I see the solicitor is still sitting in the back. Am I correct in reading here that the Board of Health is in fact a mandatory entity under state code?
The board, yes.
Chapter 111, yeah.
The health department or the board?
The board in this case. Yeah, just making sure. Councilor Di Natale.
While it is, just also, the Board of Health doesn't get paid, right? The members?
Correct.
And so this budget for the Health Department, Board of Health oversees the Health Department, correct? They appoint the director,
Yes.
but the budgeted amounts for the Health Department, which fall under the Board of Health, doesn't encompass the board. You could get rid of the Board of Health tomorrow, it wouldn't affect this budget one penny, correct?
Right.
'Cause right, okay, I just wanted to make that clear, that from a budgetary standpoint, they have no effect on this, if you were to get rid of them, if that were even allowed, but I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Councilor Squalia?
Thank you. So I see our MOPC grant ended in FY '21, and I'm wondering if we reapply for that, or if this like Mass 3, Call 3 grant kind of subsidizes that, or how that funding sources work.
I'm sorry, Counselor, I don't really know.
I think that's what it is. I think there was the MOPC grant, and then the SAPC grant, and the OD2A grant, and then I think the Mass Call 3 is similar to that.
Okay, we'll ask about that.
Councilor Boschman?
One final question, I just want to let the mayor know and you guys know, on the contact tracer that for COVID-19.
Yeah.
Some people that got in contact with this person, they're very, very good, and they were very, very helpful, so I just want to give them credit where credit's due. They found them very, very interesting and very helpful on what they recommended and what they did for them. So, thank you.
All right, further questions regarding the Board of Health? All right, moving on, Board of Health expenses. Yep.
It's continued, yes. Under expenses, the first line item, contract food and milk inspector services. This was a consultant that the city hired while they were looking for a new inspector. No longer needed. There's a small balance, a small request for the upcoming year in case there's any training needed for the new person. Weights and measures equipment, a small request for that. There is some money encumbered to purchase equipment when we do hire somebody. Mileage increase this year is, they were down 2 personnel this past year, so they didn't have as many people on the road. So they're hopefully have a full complement this year, so that's the reason for the increase there. And then contract services for weights and measures. The state has been stepping in to assist the city while we've been searching for somebody. So that's what the cost is there. Hopefully, we'll find somebody this year, and we will not need to contract with the state for their services.
Questions regarding Board of Health expenses? All right, moving on. Oh, Councilor Squalia, I'm sorry.
Which line item would reflect the cost to purchase additional trash carts and recycling carts?
Supplies for rubbish? I don't know. Yeah. There's a line item, supplies, rubbish. I'm not, that may be it, Counselor, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Page 36.
And that's the contract.
All right, if that's all, moving on to it looks like the public health nurse.
Health nurses, yes. First line item, public health nurse, that's a contractual increase. Same with the second line item, school nurses. That is actually the nurse that covers the parochial schools. Vaccine coordinator, and then the COVID-19 response unit down below that. Those are, the response unit is the tracers that, the contact tracers that Councilor Boschman was speaking of a few minutes ago. These positions are fully funded by grants, and they will continue for as long as they're needed.
Questions regarding the public health nurse budget? All right, moving on.
Rubbish collection and disposal. The budgeted amount for next year is a 7.5% increase at the request of Waste Management. They have cited increased costs for their vehicles and fuel, so that's the reason for the increase there. Closed landfill maintenance fund was not funded at this time. That would be just some money set aside to monitor the various landfills throughout the city.
Now, regarding our contract with Waste Management, I think I asked this back when we had them in front of us, but they're asking for an increase due to their increased expenses. Do they give us any kind of rebate when they fail to meet their contracted obligations?
That would be a Steve Curry question.
Yeah.
Right. I'll ask him. Thank you. Councilor Giannatalli?
Mr. President, I remember Mr. Curry last year answering that, because I think I asked him the same thing, and he said no. Be that as it may, I do want to remind everybody that last year, Waste Management openly said to us, you don't want us to do yard waste anymore. You can give it to somebody else.
Yeah,
They were
I
basically
do
telling us to
recall
take
that.
business away from them, and I'm like, oh, Steve, make
I
a note of
also
that.
recall them saying that a lot of the failures in services were due to conditions that they were aware of well before the pandemic and before they signed their most recent contract with us.
Yes.
But I'm violating my own rules and going off topic. I apologize. Any further questions regarding rubbish collection and disposal budget? All right, moving on.
Thank you. Okay, next page is Veteran Services. Under Personal Services Clerical, they did go without a clerical person for some time last year. They have hired somebody now, so the increase reflects a full year's salary. Temporary Personal Services is what they used while they were without a clerical person, so that will not be needed this year, so that's the reduction there. Travel and meetings, the Veteran Services Commissioner is going to be attending her annual conference now after not having attended for a couple of years. And the Memorial Day increase is just a need for, actually the cost of flags has gone up, so that's the increase there. And then she's asked for a little bit more under our funerals, just because of the number of funerals that they've been handling lately.
Questions regarding the Veterans Department? All right, I am just a little bit curious. This is more of a technical budgeting question than a question about where the money is going. But this is the third page I think I've seen where there's a difference of exactly $1 between FY22 and 23. I'm just curious how such tiny discrepancies creep in there as opposed to just level funding.
So that's the city auditor doing his auditing. And oftentimes what'll happen when a budget comes in is the department will make a calculation, and they'll round up or down depending on how the pennies fall. If you're doing budgeting, you always round up. And so I always round up because you want to have, you don't want to have a 29-cent deficit, you want to have a 71-cent surplus.
Gotcha.
At the end of the year.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you. I just figure if I notice it, someone else probably will, and we'll be wondering what the heck is going on. So, Councilor Squalia, you had your hand up?
Yes, the Veteran Benefit Health Fund, this is funded 75% by the state?
Reimbursed, yes.
Reimbursed, reimbursed. Is that both the Health Fund cash and the Health Fund funerals, that's 75% reimbursed?
Yes.
And do we have, is the numbers going down because there are less veterans needing our services?
The numbers have gone down, yes. I'm not sure of what the reason is, but the number has gone down.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on the Veterans Department? All right, moving on.
Council on Aging. So the increases to personal services there are contractual. There was a request to reinstate the program coordinator, which was not funded in this budget. The only other change would be the site manager. The Council on Aging had nutrition services through MOC, a lunch program, and the Council on Aging shared half of the salary for the site manager's position. A decision was made to start doing these meals in-house instead of with MOC, and they began that, I believe, last summer or fall. They have gotten actually volunteers to cook and serve the meals. All the folks have been trained. They're ServSafe certified. Meals are served 3 days a week at $3 a meal. The $8,000 that is being requested and funded in this budget is for supplies for providing those meals, as well as some of the food, and the remainder of the food is donated.
Any questions regarding Councilor Brochman?
I'm site manager on that position, and the in-house on the food. I heard from different people that went the other day, the food is excellent. I think the mayor can attest to that, and it's around his budget, $3, but it's very, very good. A lot of people like it. And Andy DiMartino is one of the cooks, so.
Okay.
Well, thank you for the testimony on that. Councilor Van Hazinga.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the program coordinator position is the last position that was cut or not filled when we made our cuts in the when there were cuts made in FY21 at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and I was just wondering what the rationale for not restoring this this level of service to the senior center is.
I'm sorry, Counsel, I couldn't hear the last part of your comment. What?
So I believe this is the last position that was cut or not filled at the start of the COVID pandemic. And I believe all the other ones have since been reinstated. And I was wondering what the rationale for not refilling this position is now that we're on better financial footing.
Go ahead.
Counselor, there were 4 positions that were eliminated when we made those cuts. There were a number of positions that were vacant, and we didn't fill them. There were 4 positions that were actually eliminated. The program coordinator was one. The recreation administrative assistant was one. There was somebody in the treasurer's office, clerical person in the treasurer's office, and the printer, the city printer. 4 positions that were abolished, and none of them have been restored.
Oh, none of them have, okay.
None of those 4 have. Other positions that were not filled have since been filled. But those 4 had people in those positions, and they were laid off.
Okay. So this, when we were at that time making those cuts, it was under the impression it was because we had to find some money to save in preparation for some bad times. Is it the determination that these 4 positions were not needed, that could be filled moving forward?
Well, speaking of the program coordinator at the senior center, that was born out of the fact that COVID precluded any sort of outside programming. No one was coming in. There really wasn't any need for a program coordinator. There was no programming. The suggestion is it's coming back. It's come back, and we talked about replacing it or bringing it back, but we're still reviewing our options in that regard.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions regarding the Council on Aging? All right, seeing none.
Recreation on page 39. So the increases to this budget are because this summer, the Recreation Department expects to return to their full programming for the first time since COVID started. So all of these increases in salaries are due to that. And actually, their expenses are level funded, so there's nothing there.
All right, questions regarding the Recreation Department? Councilor Cruz.
Just for clarification, what are the duties of a playground instructor?
I think that's a question for Nate LaRose.
I guess I'll save it for then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Squalia.
I have in my notes the playground instructor operates at Coolidge Park. Coolidge Playground.
Okay.
I think the council is asking, what exactly do they do?
Yeah, we'll have to ask.
Yeah.
We don't have a job description.
I think it's coordinating games and events and making sure the kids behave themselves. It's,
Supervising them, keeping
summer
them
thing,
safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you could, Mr. Mayor, maybe get Mr. LaRose to indicate the distinction between the playground supervisor and playground instructor.
Council, that's one of the examples of, reaching out to the parks director or the rec director and make an appointment with him and talk to him about it.
I will, thank you.
Good, thank you.
All right, Councilor Fleming.
The playground instructor, is that one position? And we increased it by $25,000? Or is that 2 people? Because it was
I think it's 2.
funded 32, 31, 33, nothing, then 15, and now it's at 41.
It's, yeah.
I think it's 2.
It's more than one position. The reason in fiscal '21 and fiscal '22 is that the numbers are so low is because of COVID, and they were not
right.
running all the programs.
But it's a couple of people.
I'm sure it is. It's multiple people.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because it's only for the summers.
Right.
Correct, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Brochman?
Yeah, I believe it's 2 people because they get one at Park Hill.
No.
That usually goes and direct the kids and have playtime.
I was hearing from the back of the room 7 people. Is that several? Several? Oh, okay, so not necessarily 7, but several.
That's it, she answered my question, thank you very much.
Councilor Gianatolli?
At one time, in 2010, there was about 17 of them. And they were multiple people at each park, mostly high school, college-age students that are looking for a summer job. That's who makes up this amount, so several. I remember 10 or 12 years ago, there was close to 20 of them. I don't know what it is today, but it's definitely more than 5 or 6.
Okay. Further questions regarding the Recreation Department? Seeing none?
Library on page 40. City just, under personal services, the city just hired a new chief librarian. The decrease in salaries because of the change in personnel. Professional, down towards the bottom of the personal services, professional, and then the library assistants, the large increases there. They've been short one person in each one of those categories recently, so they've just recently hired a new reference librarian, so that position will be filled, and I believe they are working on hiring another library assistant.
And the rest looks level funded?
Fairly level funded, yeah. The 6,700 just on the book and material adult, that's a minimum expenditure to continue getting support from the state.
All right, questions regarding the library budget? Seeing none?
Thank you. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Brooks.
Thank you. So we're going to page 41. The first section are employee benefits. The pension assessment of just over 15 million is the amount required per our funding schedule, and that at this point is increasing 6% annually going forward. The health insurance increase reflects a rate increase of 2.5%. The city is contemplating a 1-month premium holiday in the fall due to the balance within the health insurance trust fund. Medicare tax has an increase of $50,000 to reflect the fact that the city is approaching 100% of its employees paying the Medicare tax. Anyone hired prior to 1986 is excluded from having to pay a Medicare tax. General insurance has an increase of $100,000 to reflect probable premium increases next year due to market conditions. We are having, and knock on wood, if this is wood, reasonably good experiences with our insurance, or lack of losses is what I want to say. So in that respect, we're getting it to be in a good place to go into the market. However, the market is the market itself is a little shaky and prices are going up. I would point out that the Civic Days appropriation is back to 18,000 from 12. Holiday decorations is up from 5,000 to 10,000 to reflect added costs and some of the things that the city is doing for Christmas. I'm sorry, for the holidays. The Snow and Ice Reserve at $675,000, and as I've said earlier, this is coming from this year's free cash. And then the school funding meets net school spending plus transportation. So we should be okay with that figure. Any questions on that?
So again, just to confirm my understanding on the section labeled transfers out,
Okay.
those are things that we have never directly budgeted under this administration, but we appropriate them out of available funds each year.
Correct. Usually, the first appropriation out of free cash is to stabilization, the second one is to OPEB, and then if we have any money going to the capital funds, that would come out in that sense.
All right, Councilor Gianatolli?
Thank you. Calvin, are we still on track to meet fully funded status on our pension account by 2034?
I believe so. The schedule, we're in the process of a new actuarial evaluation for that, but I don't believe it's changed.
Okay, so that actuarial review is going to take place this coming fiscal year?
I believe it's as of January 1st or December 31st of this year.
22?
21, 22, yeah.
And when you get that report, you'll obviously, we'll get a copy.
I believe a copy comes here,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Further questions regarding any of the miscellaneous items on this page? Seeing, Councilor Squalia.
Just in that we account for things that we add to, from free cash within this budget for just transparency purposes. On page 28 for the MS4,
Oh, yeah.
we had funded that line item from free cash. I have a note from FY '22, and I don't know, was it after January, February when you created the projected budget, so we didn't have that number?
Correct.
Well, that will get filled.
That 400,000 was just appropriated last week, maybe? So there's a point, I do the projected FY '22, and I don't particularly change it after I set it up. I could, but it's,
Okay.
yeah.
Further, Councilor Gianatolli.
One more. What is the balance currently in the stabilization fund?
$7,935,000.
So just a shade under 8 million?
Shade under 8, yep.
Okay, so when you started as auditor, how far back do you recall? What was it, how far back when you were, do you recall?
I would bet it was in the low sixes,
6 million?
6 million, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we've basically been doing 350,000 a year
Yeah.
for however long I've been
It
doing
was
this.
10,000 14 years ago.
Correct.
So we went from 10,000 to 8 million.
Right, right. I think if the city keeps putting that amount in, 350, some point maybe going to 400, but 350, the city then is building it in a way that keeps it within the 5 to 7% of budget level.
Can never save enough.
You just leave it, and it's there for emergencies. If there's a legal settlement we have to do, we take it from there. If there's a snow emergency or an ice storm like before, you have the money to do it. And it isn't to say that that's where you're going to finally pay the bills, because FEMA usually comes in or other things, but at least gives you the opportunity to say, okay, I've got the money, let's go ahead and fix what we got to fix.
Thank you.
So before I go to Councilor Schultz, I think I may have asked this in a past year, but I've forgotten. Is it possible and/or feasible for us to put the money in our stabilization fund into an interest-bearing account?
It is in an interest-bearing account.
Okay, excellent.
Better what it is.
It is, it's invested in various, mostly government notes, some CDs, and a little bit of bonds.
And what kind of return do we see on that, just out of curiosity?
Not great.
I figured. but-
It varies amongst the different investments, but it's still fairly low. The idea is the safety of the money. That's
Oh, absolutely.
You know, that's the primary concern.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to take risks with it. I was just curious if it was the kind of thing where if we keep building it up over time, eventually the income from it will become substantial enough to become a budget line item.
Well, maybe in different market conditions, but I don't know.
Well, the income stays in the fund, so it's growing the fund.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I'm just thinking ahead, just curious. Councilor Schultz.
Thank you, Council President Zarella. I know it's a small expenditure, but I noticed under the holiday decorations, we're doubling our expenditure. And I was just wondering if are we buying new decorations, or are we expanding our decorations to other parts of the city besides the downtown area, maybe Clegon area or Water Street area or something? I just was wondering if we can see more decorations around the city.
We would love to see more decorations around the city, yes.
What did she say?
Okay.
We would love to see more decorations around the city.
Did I hear her say she's going to do Ward 2?
Except,
I don't think those exact words came out of her mouth. Counselor Squalia.
Calvin, does the $73,950,000 for the Fitchburg Public Schools satisfy our net school spending requirement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Counselor Di Natale?
Yes.
Calvin, am I understand that the budget, I made a statistical note of this, and I don't have it in front of me, but actually, I probably can wing it, but the budget overall increased by, it went from 141, what we spent, to 149, so about 8.4 million, or 10 million. And you might understand that 70% of that increase is the public schools.
Yep. Yes.
Million.
Yes.
And that's how high up the net school spending went.
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm also going to say, and now it gets a little complicated. If you look at the state revenue, Chapter 70, which is state aid for education, increased $7 million.
Right,
So it's up, but as to whether it's coming out of the Fitchburg
right,
property owners' taxes, most of it's coming from the state.
right. When I have constituents look at the bottom line number of the budget and they see it grew by a lot, millions of dollars, what are we doing? And it's always 60, 70, even 80% of that increase every year is typically net school spending, state mandated for the schools.
Correct.
That they practically fund most of, if not all of, but we're still obligated to maintain our number or we don't hit the number. So I just wanted to point that out, that over 70% of this budget's increase is in state-required spending in the schools. And then if you add the pension increase on this page, you're talking well over 80% of this budget is just those two line items alone, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? All right, moving on.
Okay. That concludes the general fund budget. We'll talk about the two enterprise funds in the airport next. So-
And I will remind counselors and the public that these additional funds that we're talking about are self-contained, so we can't, for example, cut an amount from the water fund to put into a general fund expense. It's not fungible.
Correct. So going to page 43, this is the start of the Water Enterprise Fund. And enterprise funds are basically business models where the revenue stays within the fund so that the money can be used to do the capital improvements and do the work for that particular enterprise. In terms of revenue, there is no big change in the water revenue estimates. However, I'm going to talk about number 4, revenue increase, and that's for water rates. And I think most people here are aware that there is a water rate study, which in my opinion is a couple of years overdue. Currently, retained earnings for the enterprise fund stand at about $360,000, and we're using $252,270 of that amount to balance this budget, which leaves just under $100,000 left in retained earnings, and that's getting very close. The concern that I have, there's no room for error. My specific concern is that if an enterprise fund goes into deficit, that deficit gets deducted from our free cash calculation. And more than likely, we're going to have to take free cash and subsidize the enterprise fund to get it to at least a zero balance. So it's not a good place to go where you're using taxpayer revenue, which is the general fund, to fund ratepayer activities, which is your water, sewer, or wastewater users. So that's something coming, and I just alert to the council to know that that's coming. Page 44 has the personal services for the water department. It includes the step increases. It adds a junior hydraulic engineer position. And I know that the department is working very hard to fill some vacancies it has. I think Mr. Deline at the last Finance Committee meeting talked about the difficulty in finding people who want to work in the field and have the qualifications to do the jobs that they're trying to fill. Page 45 has the expenses. They mostly reflect an increase in costs. One new line is near the bottom for meter infrastructure, and that reflects the operation of our new meters that were recently installed. And then page 46 wraps up the water expenses. The water reimbursement to the city, which is money coming from the water department to the city, has increased due to increases in indirect costs. Debt service reflects current debt, and I believe there will be new debt added next June, a year from now, that would be included in an FY24 budget. So any questions on the water enterprise?
Councilor Squalia.
On page 43, we have for revenue, the city WTF reimbursement. What is that?
The which one?
The WTF reimbursement.
Okay.
It's been 172,500
So,
for years.
so that stands for wastewater treatment facility. Doesn't stand for something else. And that's for the money that the wastewater enterprise fund pays to the water department for handling the billing. So the water department handles all the billing. They print the bills, they do pay the postage, they do all of that, and then the wastewater department pays them for that service, which is roughly half the cost.
And they increased the funding for that. We might see that. We do, so wastewater pays more to water of 32,500. Is that due to personnel increases, or is that due to a budget balancing between the enterprise funds?
It's just, all right, if you jump ahead to page 48 on the wastewater budget, there's a line for city billing near the bottom.
City billing.
And that's the 205, that's the water coming, that's the expense for wastewater that's going to page 43 as revenue, 205.
And that went up because?
The postage is going up and the cost for getting the bills printed is going up. I believe we have a 3-year contract with someone to do that piece of it. The water department generates the files, sends them to a service that produces the bills and mails them.
Okay. And the Westminster reimbursement has gone down from the previous. Are they using less water, or are we charging less?
I would guess that's the case, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Councilor Cragan.
I noticed that this year, for the first time in a number of years, we have a line item of $50,000 for timber sales.
Yep.
Obviously, I'll go to the water department if, are we, where's this from? Do we know?
Okay, I don't know where they would be generating revenue from.
Yeah.
I think in the past, sometimes it's been in the budget. We haven't had any timber sales because I think we've been getting conservation restrictions instead that
Right.
prevent us from cutting timber. I think I think you'd have to talk to Mr. DeLine, but I believe he's at a point where he feels he needs to do some cutting.
Okay,
But you'd
good.
have to talk with him.
Thank you, I will. No, it's exciting to see. It's a profit.
Yes.
Counselor Brochman?
A question, Calvin, a quick question. You touched on it a little bit, you're saying we're gonna have a rate increase because they're going down low, and pretty soon we may have to pay for it. In your professional opinion, is an enterprise fund good, or should we take it back into the city fold?
Historically, enterprise funds work because you can isolate costs and revenue, and it's all focused on water. Often what happens, and I think this is what happened here in Fitchburg, is you begin to make money on water, you get water revenue and wastewater revenue. All right, simpler example is solid waste. Right now, solid waste is within the general fund budget. We could be taking the tipping fees, the actual tipping fees, and I can be bumping up the revenue another $500,000, and we can be using that to support activities, other non-trash activities. The problem is that you're not putting money, you're not taking that profit, if you will, and putting it back into the operation of trash, or you're not taking the profit you're making from water, excuse me, and putting it back into the water enterprise system. A lot of times that money gets siphoned off to other projects. And before you know it, you have leaky pipes and no money. So I think the enterprise fund works where you have an identifiable enterprise and can plan so that if you're raising the water rates, everybody knows I'm going to pay more for water, but the money's going into the water system to make sure that I continue to have clean water, or it's going into the wastewater system to make sure that when I flush, it does go away.
Now, my question to you is this then. You're saying that...
Counselor?
What?
I think, doesn't Counselor Squalia still have the floor?
Oh, you did?
No.
No. You gave it to me, the floor.
Oh, I apologize. I lost track.
You must be tired.
I am.
We all are.
You kind of look alike, that's.
My question to you, Gilman, you're saying that you're looking for a rate increase, or you're telling the public right now, and the mayor, that there may be a rate increase coming down the foreseeable future, maybe as soon as next year.
Yes.
Are the wastewater rates going to go up at the same time as the water rates? And if so, why so, when I'm looking at the budget?
Okay, so when I get to wastewater, I'm going to talk about revenue source number 5, or revenue increase number 5, which is your wastewater rates. The water rates, in my opinion, have needed to go up for a couple of years because the retained earnings have been going down. And the water department is at a point where they need to do some capital work. They need to address the water mains on Boulder Drive, connecting streets and Main Street, because we're doing all this other work. We should be taking care of the water mains at the same time. And they don't have the money to do it, and they don't have the capacity within their budget to pay for any debt service on it.
Yeah, but my question to you is this. You know, I understand what you're saying. One hand, we're saying over here, you want us to buy the rain barrels to conserve water. On the other hand, over here, you're saying, Paul, water your garden so your tomatoes will cost you $20 a piece instead of $3. Right. So where's the medium? I mean,
right. It's a two-edged.
We're pricing ourselves right out of business.
It's a two-edged sword, because we are asking people to conserve water, but when they conserve water, we have less revenue, so then we got to raise the rates in order to maintain the services that we have. That's just how it is.
All right.
All right, any further questions? Counselor Gianatolli?
Just quickly, the city used to not have enterprise funds. 2000, they enacted the enterprise funds because the city did as the auditor suggested. They collected all the revenues for water and wastewater into the general fund and completely didn't give the water and wastewater what they needed to run. And after a while, it was on the brink of collapse, so they created the enterprise funds. Our sister city next door does not have enterprise funds. And Calvin, is it true to say that if a city or a town doesn't have an enterprise fund for water and wastewater, that their free cash typically is overstated?
Well, the money that we have as retained earnings for water or wastewater becomes free cash.
But if you have a city that doesn't have enterprise funds, wouldn't their free cash be far higher than a city that does?
It could be, yes.
Okay, because I get asked all the time about why one city has X amount every year in free cash and we don't. And I said, well, one of the biggest reasons they don't have enterprise funds.
They could be doing that because they're keeping track of how much of that free cash
Yeah.
belongs to water or how much belongs to wastewater.
The enterprise fund, as history has served us, needs to keep going because we tried it once before without them and it was almost disastrous. So, thank you.
Further questions regarding the water fund? Councilor Squalia, for real this time.
Meter infrastructure has a $67,000 line item.
Yes.
I mean, I know that we've been replacing water meters all through the city for the past few years. What is this?
So that's a new cost, and that's basically to pay for the upkeep and the infrastructure that we have for these new meters. So they however they read them and all of that stuff is a cost that in the past we haven't had. And as they, you know, kind of we were talking about with City Hall, they come through their warranty, they come through their initial costs, and now we have annual costs to operate and maintain them.
Is it estimated at 67? Is that going to be at a yearly cost, or is that
I would guess so, yes.
Okay.
Following on that, do I recall correctly, granted this is way back when we were still meeting at Memorial, so I probably don't recall correctly, but I seem to remember them telling us when the meters were being changed over in the first place that the increased accuracy of the new meters would lead to increased revenues for the department. Do those increased, well, have we seen those increased revenues that were anticipated? And if so, do they balance out or exceed the cost of the new system?
I think that's a question you'd have to ask Mr. Deline.
That's fair.
My suspicion is that they have, because, do you know, are people complaining about the water bills being higher?
Yes, but that's nothing
Yes.
new.
That's not new. You'd have to ask Mr. Deline.
That's fine.
I can't understand.
Just figured I'd throw it out there.
Let's go on to the water.
All right, further questions regarding
Cheaper and better.
water? All right.
Okay, page 47, wastewater. The wastewater budget, you can see, is balanced. We're not taking anything from retained earnings for this enterprise fund. And I've already alluded to the fact that revenue number 5 for increasing is wastewater is coordinating with the water department on a rate study. I think you can expect future increases to recognize the additional projects that meet consent decree benchmarks. City Council, I believe, is in the process of approving a $30 million loan order for a large combined sewer separation project in what I would refer to as downtown Fitchburg. There's also a large retained earnings balance, but that reflects a longer-term view on trying to smooth out rates and debt payments and all that stuff. But it is something that's coming. Page 48, personal services reflect step increases in new contracts. Expenses are in line with prior years. You'll notice there's less being spent on architectural and engineering. There have been 2 changes in the position of Deputy Commissioner of Wastewater. The way the way Mr. Borowski was managing some of the projects and stuff is a little different from the way Mr. McNamara and Commissioner Erickson are going to manage it. And so there's a little less spending there because there's some encumbered funds, and we're talking about how to move forward with some of that. And then on page 49, again, you'll see that the reimbursement to the city has increased because the indirect costs are higher. and then just a few capital items that are being funded for right now. And some of that, the other reason, I guess I would say, with the architectural engineering and the capital projects not being more robust than what they are, is given the change in personnel, I think there's a recognition that they can't quite keep up with all the projects till they get new personnel in place that have a handle on what's going on, and then they can begin to move forward with additional projects. So, any questions on wastewater?
Seeing none? Oh, Counselor Boishman.
On this sludge disposal, Councilor Scorian and I brought it up before the previous commissioner left to go to greener passage. He was supposed to give us a program to see if it would be cheaper for us to do it in-house than transporting it out.
Okay.
Do you know where we stand on that?
I do not know. I do not know. I know the price went up with our current contractor versus the prior one. I also suspect that trying to do it in-house could have its challenges right now because we're having trouble finding personnel to do the basic work that we need to get done. If you're talking about truck drivers and those kinds of things, those are positions that we're having trouble filling right now in the DPW, in the water division, and in the wastewater.
But if the price keeps on going up, is the city going to take a stand on this and say, I mean, this guy's get it made. If he's got no competition, he's the only one, this guy's the limit.
Right. I think it's something, just my gut feeling is it's something we could look at, but I think right now, the principals overseeing the whole operations are up to their armpits in projects already and don't have the capacity to look at that issue. Because if you think about, from the wastewater's perspective, you've got this $30 million project we're starting, and we're trying to finish up a couple other things and fill staff, and it's just, they've kind of get their feet firmly on the ground before they can try something different like that.
Right, and I'm also looking at the fact that, we get to 2030, we only get 4 or 5 more years for the landfill, and then we got to find a home for our slush. And that, to me, that's a major issue.
Yep.
And if we're paying $300,000 and some odd $1,000 to go from East Fitchburg to the landfill, that's what, 2 miles, that kind of money, of 5 miles or 8 miles?
Right.
And then you got to check it all the way down to Lawrence or Haverhill. I hate to see the cost of that now.
Well, and they're also working on the West plant. We're doing some work on anaerobic digestion.
Yes, I know that.
So that could be a solution too. And I don't know where that's, I know that they're trying to get something going on that, and that's going to take some work as well.
Solicitor, were you looking to chime in? Oh, yeah, no, it's getting to the edge of where we should be right now, but Counselor Squalia?
I noticed in last year's budget, we started with an incinerator incentive, and I didn't know what that was. So do you know what the incinerator incentive is? Is that for us not using our incinerator?
I'm assuming,
It's
Counselor.
on page 48.
Right, it's under personal services. I'm assuming it's a stipend of some kind. I would have to see what specifically it is.
Further questions regarding wastewater? All right, seeing none?
Okay, so the last item is, before we take off, is the airport.
Here.
Know who's listening. Page 50, the airport budget is balanced. Revenue is consistent with prior years. On page 51, personal services changes reflect step increases in the new collective bargaining agreements. Expenses are comparable to prior years, except for the reimbursement of city-related costs, which has been removed. And that's what I had mentioned earlier under revenue, that in order to balance this budget, there is no reimbursement to the city for indirect costs.
Now, before I go to Councillor Boishman, because I know what he's going to ask about, I want to ask if I'm reading this correctly. Because it looks to me like in the, excuse me, the prior several years, the airport has run a deficit of approximately 55,000. Is that, am I?
It shows that, but part of that is because we have appropriated some funds to the airport from the general fund.
Right, so that's what I'm saying,
I
though,
think in
the-
FY '22 or '21, I have to go back and remember, FY '21, I think, we appropriated $135,000 to do some hangar work.
Right,
So that's why it's a minus 62. FY '22, that would be this year, it's showing a deficit, but that was in January. I don't know where we stand now. I'd have to.
Right, so my point, though, is in prior years, the airport needed to be essentially supplemented by the city to the tune of roughly 50 to 60,000.
Correct.
This year, it's balanced, but they're not paying the city 50,000. So we're not, am I correct in interpreting this to mean that the city is not actually losing any money by not getting this 50,000? In fact, if anything, we're roughly $5,000 better off than we were last year with respect to payments to and from the airport.
I guess where it's different is that in prior years, the 50,000 was included in the budget and we were balanced. This year, it's not included and we're balanced. So we've shifted 50,000.
Right, so can we expect to still need to appropriate 50 or more thousand from the city general fund to?
That I couldn't tell you. I think, we finally have gotten to a point where the new runway is operational, and we should have a year or two, at least a year under our belt, under somewhat normal operations. I know it took them a while to get the final approvals from the FAA. And so I think we have to start looking at our operations and what we're doing and so on. Some of this hinges on fuel sales, and that's where we've got to be careful because, fuel sales, right now, we could be doing well because we bought cheap and we're selling high, but that can turn around if prices drop where we've bought high and now we're trying to sell not as high. So it's just, there's some work that has to be done there.
Fair enough. Councilor Brochman.
My question to you is, number one, well, he already asked the question, but I want to know why we don't go up in the cost, because our cost is going up. You tell the public, the way our water department is going to go up in their rates because they're not making enough money. But yet, since I've been on this council, their price has stayed the same, stays the same as $50,000 a year, and nothing went up. But our cost has gone up. Our labor costs, the book costs, the insurances, and everything else. So why hasn't their cost gone up?
So their indirect costs are higher than the 50,000. The 50,000 is just the number we kind of agreed to, trying to get through all the construction and stuff that they were doing. We're still trying to get through that.
Yeah, I know we are. I've been on here 10 years, and it's $500,000 plus. So, but that's nothing. That's only a kick in the bucket because it's not our money, it's somebody else's. All right, we'll cut that. We'll find a way to cut it. Thanks.
Fair enough. Further questions regarding the airport? Councilor Squalia.
In FY '22, we projected that we would get $529,000 from airport fuel revenue, but our actual revenue is $370,000. And wondering where we are with our current projections. Right now, we're projecting a little bit more than that. But where were we when we were thinking that we were going to get $530,000?
I think when you look at the fuel revenue, you also have to look at the fuel expense. The more we sell, the more we buy. So you kind of have to look at the differential. So I think the spending or the revenue is down, but also the amount we're spending is down.
And our overnight short-term parking is lower, by a few thousand. Did we lose spaces when we redid the runway project?
That I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
All right.
vote on
Further
the budget now.
questions? Sorry?
I was just telling her that we should just vote on the budget now. He's going to pass.
Well, we could vote on it as a committee, I suppose, but I told people they would have time to submit cuts, and
Okay.
that would be the appropriate way to do it.
So I just want to go to page 53, which is the staffing levels. Usually the chief of staff does this to wrap it up, but I didn't want to put Natalia on the spot for this. So if you're just going down, the changes I would point out, human resources, we added a clerical position. Community development, there's a half position that was funded by ARPA. Police, there's 2 patrolmen funded through COPS grant. And it also, that figure of 102 also assumes full staffing, which we haven't hit in quite a while. The Board of Health has what looks like a 13-person increase. That increase is grant funded and mostly tied to the COVID response. And then I guess I would say in general, the public DPW, water and wastewater positions, if you add them up and look at them all together, there's a difference of about less than half a position. So I know they sometimes move their counts to accommodate how they are actually working. So that's it with staffing. The one last thing I would say, there is an order, the last order on the agenda is an order authorizing spending for revolving funds. And if there's questions on that, basically, there's ordinances in place that create the revolving funds, and this just authorizes spending of $100,000 or what's left in the fund, whichever is less, except for the health revolving fund, which has a limit of $700,000. And we upped that a couple years ago because that's where we're doing the MPHN work out of. So there's money being churned in that quite a bit. And with that, I think we're done here.
And as to the orders 155 through 16322, they are on the agenda, but as we are past 11 o'clock and as we are not going to be voting on them tonight anyway, I'm going to suggest that we discuss the details of those items at the following meeting after we discuss potential budget cuts. That said, that does conclude our agenda. Please submit any proposed cuts by end of day Friday to the city clerk's office. And then we will be back next Tuesday to deliberate on those cuts proposed. And that's it for the evening.
Mr. Chair, one question. Now, according to your thing, you say that if all cuts are not in by 5 o'clock, let's just say, all of a sudden, over the weekend, I'm having to be here watching the Celtics and I see something very important. Can I make
You
the
have
cut
to
on
check
Monday?
it.
Too late.
You have to be looking at it from now to Friday. It's just like with anything else. You miss the deadline, you miss the deadline.
All right. I'm not too happy with that one either.
11:11.
Make a motion, we adjourn?
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. Being that there better be no objection, we are adjourned.